What's up? How's it going? What's going on, guys? Welcome, welcome, welcome. How's the audio sounding on your guys' end? Just kind of getting things set up. All right. What's going on? How's everybody doing today? All right. How's it going? How's it going? How's the audio for everybody? Real quick. All right. All right, we're back. What's going on? So today, let's see here. Definitely wanted to chat about the Nationals coming up. Got a couple of things planned. Nothing too crazy. Not going to be too long of a stream, but you know, we'll definitely be talking about this format, some of the things we could be playing, some of the things coming up, and of course, like some of the new cards coming out with Battles of Legend as well. So that's pretty cool. Got a mail day in today too. Already sleeved up some of the stuff, but some of the potential stuff we might be playing, or at least be profiling. Nothing too crazy. Just some of the for hire stuff that we were talking about the other day. Definitely we're missing a couple of cards, but pretty sure this was the lot of it that I was missing at least. Hey, what's going on? I still haven't decided on a deck, really. I have access to pretty much anything at this time. A couple of things I'm missing for some of the more niche stuff, but I'm still trying to decide exactly what I want to play. But we definitely just got these in the mail. Very happy about this. Now we can actually start playing this in person, see if this is something I want to consider. But let's see. Oh, and finally got this. I don't know if you caught the Labyrinth profile. I was talking about how I didn't have one of these. This finally came in the mail, the 20-cent card that couldn't find anywhere. Okay, so definitely some things we could consider going into Nationals. Yeah, it was in the mail, and you know, today it finally came. Nothing that's really gonna break the bank, but you know, now we can play it. I could show off a runic deck today. Really, the plan was kind of go over the potential things we could run into and kind of decide what we're going to be doing, or at least our options, and kind of let you guys know at least my logic going into a big event. You just kind of talk about what decks are relevant, what we're going to be factoring in when we're trying to not only decide on a deck, but build a deck. Because there's a lot of really powerful tech cards that we could be playing. And Ace of Wrath, how's it going? Welcome, welcome. Yeah, late night stream. Normally we'll do stuff in the afternoon, but we had some free time, so we're here. But yeah, we'll dig into it. We'll check out exactly, what our options are, talk about some of the cards, and then kind of go from there. Let's see here. I had a little rough draft thing here pulled up of stuff that we could be talking about. Let's see here. All right. All right, so here's my my funny little chart here, if you want to call it that. But basically, up here on the top, I have basically all the things that come to my mind, at least right out the gate, to prepare for, at least something that I expect to run into at least maybe one of in like a 12-round event. There are obviously other decks in the format, but when going into an event, you have to kind of think what obviously is going to be the most represented, and then kind of have to address what cards or what decks do you expect to run into the most, and then kind of build your deck from there, whether it's choosing a deck that has a good matchup or choosing a rogue option that will catch people off guard. There's a lot of things to factor in, but this will be kind of what we dig into here in a little bit. Yeah, Vanquish Soul for the win, for sure. Yeah, Vanquish Soul, definitely one of those decks that right now, it reminds me a lot of like like Sun Avalon. Not like the deck does the same thing, but just like so many people don't understand the deck, and that's what gives it such an edge. And I'll admit that I know what this deck does and how to play it decently, but I'm still currently practicing more and more with this to at least get comfortable enough to where, like, if I wanted to go to a regional or something, that I would be able to pilot it. But even right now, I still feel like there's a lot of technical play I can get better with this deck. How's the audio sound for everybody? Music's not too loud. Microphone's coming in pretty good. No echoes or anything. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. But, okay. Real quick. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. What's the best card in the side for Vanquish Soul? Well, I guess it really depends on what deck you're playing, because not every deck can just generically side things. Like, for example, I guess like Goes and Match. Goes and Match is really good against that deck. But again, if you're playing a deck like, I don't know, Kashtira, you're not going to side deck Goes and Match. So it's kind of hard to say like what the best side deck card is for it. But if you're looking for like generic stuff to like play against them that like any deck can play, off the top of my head, something like Kaijus are pretty decent, being able to get the bodies off the field, especially if they end with like the Link monster and a body. If you have an answer to the Link monster, you can like always Kaiju one of the bodies. Their Link monster can't go to defense, so the book won't work. They can always special one from the hand, but again, that's taking resources from them. So again, it's not amazing, but it's pretty good. Lava Golem's like really amazing when they have multiples, because if you could just clear their field off of the names, then they really just can't do anything. It's pretty crazy. Tikaboo and go to sleep. Yeah, exactly. Tikaboo is definitely it's a heck of a card. Speaking of which, definitely need to include that card. That's a solid card to the list. We'll definitely talk about that card. Imperm during draw or standby phase. Yep, that's really good against the Vanquish Soul as well. Yeah, there's a lot of things. Like, the deck isn't like unfair or anything. It's actually a pretty fair deck. But like not understanding how to really like pilot to your best ability against it, the deck really thrives in a resource kind of game. So when you start giving up little 1-for-1s or little trades that they're getting away with, that's when the deck can just kind of get out of control, because they just start accumulating a bunch of cards, and the more cards they have in hand, the more they can do. Opinion on deck dev virus ban or not? Yeah, so that's kind of like the topic for everybody, isn't it? Like whether or not deck devastation should be banned. I know okay, so in my opinion, after watching, the finals, which, everybody's seen by now, I'm sure, it showcased the power of Eradicator, right? And Eradicator has been around for quite some time and been doing similar things for a very, very long time. The question is it fair in a deck that can search it, I guess? But aside from that, in general, I think the card is really broken. All the virus cards, in my eyes, are just really unfair cards that are format dependent. Of course, there's going to be formats where Eradicator does nothing, but there's going to be formats where, deck dev is insane, right? So it's like, for me personally, I think all the virus cards are really unhealthy. Whether or not they get banned or not, we'll see, but I definitely think they're ban-worthy cards. But I definitely don't think just because they ripped somebody's hand apart in the finals, that's not the reason to ban it. I mean, like, for example, that combo where you go Lady Chainlink 1, or I'm sorry, you go, what's her name? I always get this one mixed up. What is her? Lab. The Lovely, right? Yeah, Lovely. Okay, so like when you... Lovely Chainlink 1 and then a virus card Chainlink 2 has like always been a thing, because at least it's been a thing since Labyrinth has been relevant, just because like it played out exactly how the like textbook combo is, where since the rip will be Chainlink 1, you're hoping that your virus card will rip the majority of the cards in their hand, and then the Lovely will hit the 1 or 2 cards that are left. It's just really unfortunate that his opening hand was literally only spells and 1 monster, so he got hand ripped for 6, but yeah. Dang, Brian. You're right. I didn't reply to your DB message. I caught it right towards the end of the stream, and I was like, wait a minute, who is this? How's it going, Brian? How you been? Why did you come to a lab discussion? You came to an Eradicator banning discussion. That's not so much does a Labyrinth the kind of thing, but whether or not Eradicator should be banned. Guards come and go and feel fine, especially transition to Dune, shifts combo decks. Yeah, that's the thing. It's so weird. You can't... Konami's never going to ban every unfair card, and I think that's the thing. It's like, for example... What's a really good example? I guess, like... There's formats where, like, Dimensional Barrier has run rampant. Like, last year's Nationals format, this card was pretty solid, but, like, just before it, like, where you're hitting, like, the Synchro decks, like Sword Soul, or the Punk Synchros, or the branded decks, or anything like that, and, like, the majority of decks are getting hurt by this card. Everyone wants it banned, but then there's, like, the very next format where this card's, like, very average. It kind of just... It's unfortunate because there's these really broken cards, and you can't just ban them all because... I mean, you can, but Konami's not going to do it. Scythe is another great example. There's a few formats that Scythe was like insane, and then there's, of course, then there was a format where nobody was playing it. You know, it just always fluctuates. Erad shouldn't be banned if you limit Big Welcome and basically banned Erad. Yeah, definitely true. But that's the question becomes kind of philosophical. Like, what do you ban when you're banning something? Do you ban the problem card, or do you ban the card that gets the problem card? And I've noticed traditionally, not always, but traditionally, Konami really likes hitting the cards that get you access to the broken cards more so than actually hitting the broken card. That way they don't have to ban cards, but they just make it harder for you to get those cards. I guess the best example that I could think of is, you know, they'd rather ban something like a Wind-Up Zen Mighty to bring a monster out from the deck rather than ban Wind-Up Hunter that does the actual hand loop, right? It's kind of stupid. But yeah, I guess in summary, Eradicator, definitely a ban-worthy card, and I think it should someday go, but whether or not it does, I really doubt it. And I mean, like, they could put it to 1, but again, when, you know, Labyrinth's in the meta, it's kind of irrelevant. But hypothetically, if they put this to 1 and then they hit the Labyrinth deck in some way to make it to where you're not getting access to this consistently, then it's actually relevant, because now the deck's not pulling it out of the deck relevantly or reliably. And then now that it's at 1, you're just, you know, not going to see it. You can't trap trick it either. So that's another possible scenario that could happen. They'll ban it 3 formats from now. Oh yeah, that's yeah, that's exactly what they did with Scythe. They'll let it run rampant, and then when it's irrelevant, the next ban list they'll ban it and be like, oh, you know, you're welcome. The problem is everybody's trying to play Erad Virus in the side deck after Watch the Massacre. Yeah, so, but that's the thing, right? And that's one thing I actually like about this game. While sometimes some crazy things happen, when they go to influence the format, it makes it to where now everybody deck builds and everybody, you know, tries to compensate for these cards in different ways. And it kind of creates unique deck building opportunities while also being able to take advantage of maybe some flaws in those counters as well. So you can kind of counter the counter, I guess. Do you think Tikaboo should be in the main deck for the WCQ? I mean, like, you know, depending on the deck. Like if you're playing like Vanquish Soul, or if you're playing like a going first Sky Striker list or something of that nature, then yeah, I definitely could think about it, or I definitely would consider it. If you're playing something like Branded, then I'd just side it. But yeah, I definitely think it's a solid option whether you main it or side it, depending on the deck. Of course, there's going to be decks that can play under it, but you know, you kind of have to make that decision on what you expect to run into, like, which we'll talk about. Like I said, I kind of got this little what I expect to see at the WCQ. Red Reboot back after this. I don't like unbanning insanely unfair cards just to counter other insanely unfair cards. Maybe that's a hot take, but that's just me. I don't know. I actually, you know, I really like Red Reboot, but again, that just because I like a card doesn't, you know, justify it coming off the ban list or anything. But yeah, Red Reboot would definitely be something that would help. We do have a possible side deck pseudo Red Reboot card. Maybe you guys already spotted on the little list of stuff here. I'm not saying it's the best, but depending on the deck that you're playing, it's actually a pretty decent option. Let me get some coffee really quick. Late night tonight, right? Lucky for me, I'm located in California, so, you know, my time zone, this isn't too late, so I got some time, but I don't know where all you guys are at, but I know it can get pretty late pretty fast on the other side of the country. Fenrir in the Vanquish Soul deck? Personally, yeah, I think so. I think it's really nice. And I know some people even play the Arise Heart because it's a fire target. And I think if you have the space to do that, sure. But I definitely don't think that option's needed. But, you know, I definitely think being able to fit any generic earths and fires and I guess darks into your deck that are not going to make your deck less consistent, if anything, make it even better, is always a plus for the Vanquish Soul deck because it's already a pretty linear deck. NC, oh, nice. Are you going to be going to Nationals of Wrath? East LA, right on. Welcome, welcome. East Coast, nice. Love the East Coast. Jersey. You know, I actually haven't been to Jersey. Ugh. All right, let's see here. Let's kind of just fade this out. Still haven't decided if... Oh, Cancun, no way. Awesome, welcome. That's awesome. I'm going to turn this volume down. I still haven't decided of whether or not I'm going to chop any of this up into shorts or, you know, videos or anything like that. But we'll figure it out. Let's see here. You never know. You guys might pop up on a YouTube video coming up. Okay, let's see. That's funny. One sec. Punk Therion? Yeah, Punk Pride Therion's pretty nice. I still haven't been able to fit the Therions in myself, but Punk Pride's pretty nice. It's just one of those decks where it's a bunch of one-card combos, get a lot of free advantage if people aren't hand-trapping you, diverse interruptions, monsters and spells and traps, always really nice. Share the live, guys. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, share the love, share the stream. Appreciate it. Flu best deck? Oh, yes, Flu. Yeah, you gotta love the birds. Always loving the birds. Okay. I guess we could jump right into this. Okay. Move this right over here. All right. Flu definitely. Yeah. Oh, man. Okay. So let's talk about it. All right, so on the top here is basically what I would say is either the most represented decks or decks that I personally would expect to see going into the WCQ after about 12 rounds or so. Some you would expect to see more than most. Yeah, some you'd expect to see more than most, but in general, I'd expect to at least run into one of these. Basically from the bottom three here up, but I would expect to play 3 to 4 rounds of any of these top few decks, and then of course a couple of others sprinkled in. Variance is always the thing. You could obviously play against a bunch of rogue all day, but at the end of the day, there's a bunch of things you could run into. So the first kind of deck I wanted to talk about was Sprite. Sprite's obviously looking to be one of the best of the format, and it's been proving that in the last WCQs. And going into the next WCQ, I don't see a reason why it won't be. Whether you're playing like the Live Twin variant or the For Hire variant, I think they're both very strong. I think they both have their own strengths and weaknesses. I think on paper, the Live Twin definitely has a lot more consistency. It's not as much free advantage as something like the For Hire, which, in my opinion, if this deck goes off, it's very hard to check. But with the Live Twins being a little bit more in the middle of the road, you can generate a lot of free advantage, but it does, it doesn't get as much free cards as, the For Hire variant, but it's definitely a solid option. It does lose to more stuff like Bell and Bystials and stuff like that, but I definitely expect these two variants of Sprite to be the most represented, and who knows, you might run into Melfi Sprite as well, but, Melfi Sprite's not as represented. After that, I expect a lot of cash, probably equally as much as Sprite. There's a lot of people that love Sprite, so I expect a lot of people to be playing it. But Cash Tira is just a very, very solid deck. I don't really see a reason to not play it if you have it. I mean, I think there's two people who play this deck. It's either one, it's all you have, or two, you just genuinely like it. But I would honestly say most people opt to not play this deck because they don't think it's good. But I think people opt to not play this deck because they just don't enjoy playing it, which is, totally understandable. But honestly, I think this deck is really, really good. I think it's super consistent still. Not as consistent now that this is at 2, the Unicorn, but, it's definitely got its perks. And, of course, the main deck monsters are just really insane. So it's definitely something you have to kind of factor in when building your deck. The Labyrinth deck, obviously, it just, one German that's so, Eradicator's a heck of a card, but, this deck is really good whether you're playing the Trap variant or the furniture version. So I definitely think whether you're playing the Trap variant or the furniture version, there's a bunch of different ways you could approach it. I personally haven't decided on what I think the best is, but I definitely think the higher ceiling is the furniture variant. And again, if this is something you're trying to personally play, you just kind of have to figure what do I expect to run into in the meta, like something like Evenly Matched and Lightning Storm and Harpy Feather Duster. And so is it better to go back towards the Furnitures because those cards play around it, or do you not expect a lot of those, so you go back on more like traps, like Floodgates, like, Skill Drain and whatnot. Of course, another deck to expect would be Branded, something I definitely have to factor in. Being Puppet Locked is definitely scary, but I don't think most players will be Puppet Locking. While it's definitely an option, and there are going to be players doing it, I know if I'm preparing for this deck, it's something that's going to be in the back of my head. But I just think this deck is very scary, has decent matchups into a lot of decks. It does have its flaws with D-Barrier and Ash, but again, that's one of those things where if you can pilot your deck well enough to play through or around those cards, this deck's definitely very scary for a lot of decks in the format. Then another deck, of course, is going to be the Vanquish Soul deck. Very scary, especially because most players don't understand the deck fully. I think as time goes on, more and more players are going to be figuring it out. But I think in the German Nats, there was only one that topped. Correct me if I'm right. There might have been two, but I definitely think this deck's solid and a great option and can catch a lot of people off guard. It just takes a lot of precision, a lot of patience, and you definitely have to be up on your game and your technical play, because any small mistakes you make with this deck, you definitely will get punished for it, because there's a lot of really unfair decks that get free advantage for no reason, and so you don't want to give up the advantage you have to work so hard for by misplaying with this deck. Now, a couple of other decks that I have my eye on would be the Rocket deck and the Sun Avalon deck. Both very, very good decks, but I don't expect a lot of them to be at Nationals. I could definitely see that the Dragon Link deck could be very represented. There's a lot of people who really love Dragon Link. But in all, I definitely think these decks are going to be at the event. Again, very similar to the Vanquish Soul deck, the Sun Avalons are just one of those decks that nobody's prepared for. It's a great combo deck. While it has its flaws like any other deck, I definitely think it's a solid option, and it's definitely something you should consider. While you might not want to deck build around it, you at least want to have something in your side that's at least decent against the deck. What's the easiest deck to learn quickly? Have a zombie deck, but I don't think it's... Yeah, zombies right now aren't really that meta right now, unfortunately. I think if you're trying to learn something quickly, try to get something that's not too combo orientated, maybe something like Trap Tricks or even the Labyrinth deck if you have enough money. Kashtira, yeah, there you go, Zefrath. Kashtira is very, very easy to learn. I don't know what your budget is, but definitely depending on your budget, that kind of influences the options I would give you. But on the higher end, I would say Cash, very powerful, very consistent, and very easy to learn, but it costs money. And if you're trying to save a buck but have something that's good to go into events, I'd probably say something along the line of like Trap Tricks or maybe even Sky Striker. But again, Sky Striker cards have actually been going up in price, so it just depends on what your budget is. Guardian, Gate Guardian, yes, of course. Oh. All right, and for the last card on this list, it's the Assault Synchron. This isn't like a deck, but I guess it's something you could factor in when you're talking about, the Sprite variants coming up, or even Dragon Link could be playing this card. There's a bunch of different decks that could splash it in. I don't think it's going to like warp the meta or anything, but when going into Nationals, this is something that, at least for us, we have to be prepared for. Whether it's like Danglong combos with the Sprite deck and, using Diva and all that. There's some crazy decks out there that really put up a bunch of different interruptions, search a bunch of different counter traps, and set up a multitude of interruptions off these cards. And like I said, and especially in Sprites, it's just a generic 2 special summon. It locks you into the synchros, but this card's really great. And I definitely think when building your deck, you have to factor that in. So all in all, this is really just like what I would consider when deck building, not only as like options that I would like consider to play myself, but when I'm deck building, I want to make sure if my main deck isn't catered for what I expect, I at least cover it in the side. So I guess some of the, options you can kind of decide about when choosing a deck is what you expect there to be a lot to be. Or I'm sorry. I guess when deciding to pick a deck, you have to consider what you expect to see the most. And like I touched on earlier, I would expect this half of the room or this half of the chart here being what you guys should see the most, being Sprites and Cash. And then Labyrinth is probably going to be popular going into the North American NAWCQ. So if we kind of assume, I guess, that those are going to be the most represented, then I definitely would think either if you're not going to play these decks yourself, you want to make sure you're at least playing a deck that can beat these decks going first or especially going second, because, you know, you're expecting to run into these a lot in the tournament, I guess. So, for example, let's say you were a big Sprite fan, whether you're playing the Live Twins or the Fur Hires, you know you're going to run into the mirror match a lot. I would expect in 12 rounds, you're probably going to at least run to 3, maybe 4 matchups. And then I would expect you to run into at least 2 or 3 Kashtira. Again, could be 4 or more. I would expect to see at least 1, maybe 2 Labyrinth. I think you'd be lucky to see 1 or 2 Branded. I think you'd be lucky to run into 1 Vanquish, 1 Rocket, and then, of course, the 1 Sun Avalon. And, of course, there's a bunch of other stuff. But I guess the majority of what I would expect would be this top half of the chart. So if I were to be playing Sprite, I'd want to make sure that my deck is catered in the main deck to run into these decks specifically, because I'm most likely to play into them, and I want my game ones to be as high impact as possible, or at least have the best advantage going into those matchups. The downside is, of course, when you run into these other matchups, the cards you might be playing might not be generically as good to counter these cards. So that's something to consider in deck building, whether it's just playing generic hand traps or playing like board breaker cards like Dark Ruler. So again, you kind of have to address that in deck building, like what are your bad matchups and what do you expect to run into? And that's kind of all the things you have to factor in when really teching your deck out once you've decided once you're going to play. So I guess the first kind of thing I wanted to talk about was like hand traps. I personally feel really weird about hand traps this format and whether or not you should be maining them or siding them. For sure, there's a lot that I would consider side decking, but whether or not you're going to main a bunch, I guess it kind of depends on what deck you're going to play. If you're playing like, you know, a punk deck that has a lot of room for a bunch of hand traps, then of course I would be playing 12 plus hand traps, because hand traps are good this format if you can see 2 or more consistently, or if you're drawing really oppressive ones like, you know, Shifter or Retaliating Sea, or I guess Draw and Lock in certain matchups as well would kind of fall into that category. So that being said, if I were to be playing hand traps right now, I think for sure Ash and Imperm are very solid right now, whether it's against Kashtira, whether it's against Sprite. Of course, Ash is really great against Branded and the Labyrinth. So for me, Ash is always going to be like the first one I consider if I am trying to play a hand trap, just because it hits every deck. And of course, that's always been the thing about Ash, is it's really good against everything, but really high impact, of course, against 2 really expected decks of the format, being Labyrinth and Albaz as well. What's going on? Welcome. Glad you're here, Andrew. I know you wanted to jump in the last stream. I'm glad you're here. We're just talking about the North American WCQ and what to expect and what to build for. So when it comes to Imperm, it kind of falls in the same category as like Ash, where it can kind of generically hit everything else, but it's not very high impact against like Labyrinth and Branded. It has applications, but the reason why it's not as good as Ash is because Ash still has the potential of skipping turns for the Labyrinth deck and for the Branded deck. So since Imperm really doesn't have that kind of potential, at least in these, you know, higher or more expected matchups, while it's just generically great card, it's not, how do I say this? While it's still a really great generic card, it's not as good as Ash because it's, you know, just as generic without being able to skip your opponent's turn in certain matchups. After that, there's Nibiru. This card's really great, but really bad at the same time. Obviously, it's really matchup reliant, and with what I expect to see on the top of this chart, while there are going to be times that Sprite doesn't go into Gigantic or they don't put up a red, it's not very likely. So, you know, for that reason, I really don't see a world where I like Nibiru against Sprite, unless, again, you're playing a multiple hand trap deck with like 12 plus hand traps. That way you can see it alongside something like Ash or Imperm, making it to where it's a really great card. It's actually really good against Kashtira right now, so it is something you can consider if you're, you know, expecting to run into Cash a lot, which I guess we are coming into this format. If I were to be putting Nibiru into my main deck, I think it would be because I have so many hand traps, but also another reason would be if your deck loses to Kashtira specifically, A lot of them right now are going into Shangri-Era, Arise Heart. Even some of them are doing like the Utopic combos and stuff like that. And they're getting very greedy with going over 4 summons. Even though just going Arise Pass is a thing, Game 1's players are very, very greedy, at least from what I've seen. So Nibiru could be an option if your deck auto loses to Arise Heart. Not saying you should, but if you have the room, it's definitely an option. Typically, cash combo summons 4 times. Yeah, that's what the Arise Heart pass is definitely scary. But like I said, I think since the deck is very fair, more times than not, at least most players that I've been seeing now in tournaments have been going into Shangri-Era, then follow up with Arise Heart, going 5+ summons. I actually think it might even just be better in some cases just to like end your field with like Fenrir and Unicorn and just like set some back row or chill on some hand traps. But again, we'll see how it develops. But Arise Heart Pass obviously is just the safe route to go, but from what I've seen, not a lot of people are doing that. At least game 1s. Game 2 and 3, especially if you're playing against something like, I don't know, like Labyrinth. If you just go Arise Pass, that's usually just good enough. But, if you're playing Nibiru, game 1s, you might not be, you might not know that you're playing against Labyrinth, so you might just try to go full combo because your deck's kind of fair right now, and then you get hit by Nib and, you get really sad. Of course, game 2 and 3, you're not going to be doing that, though. Not going to lie, apart from the obvious main decking Nib in my lab deck, just for the cheese IKEA combo. Yeah, no, exactly. Like, so that would be a reason to play this Nibiru. Not just for, like, the furniture combo, but, again, your deck does struggle with the Rise Heart, and if players are going to be really greedy with their first turn combo, then Nibiru might resolve more times than you think in that matchup. Of course, against Sprite, again, a very popular deck, that might be something that, doesn't happen a lot. Are there any events in between now and the WCQ? I believe there's another WCQ the week before. I think Euros happens before us. I'm pretty sure. I could be mistaken. And then, of course, there's, I believe, a bunch of regionals that happen, at least, throughout the states. But, nothing that's like, no YCSs or anything huge. If I made Nib, it would only be against branded or in branded because the Titaniclad. Yeah, that's true. That's definitely a solid target for the Titaniclad, making your thing huge. Because what is it, a level 11 or a level 12 or something like that? Yeah, 11. Yeah, that's pretty hilarious. So after the Nib, there's Ghost Bell, and this is probably the last hand trap on this list that I would consider main decking unless you're playing, some niche deck that has other access to other hand traps. I think Bell is good enough in the format that hits the majority of the things up here and has applications against Kashtira. While it's not that great, it's still a decent card. The only problem is this card, it can at least stop Birth, which is, okay. It's not crazy. And again, if your deck just struggles with Arise Pass already, then you probably don't want to be main decking this card. But obviously, this is going to be really great to side deck. It's good against the Live Twins. It's good against the Fur Hires. Obviously, it's great against Branded and insane against Labyrinth. So it's definitely a solid option to side deck for sure. But again, when you're trying to talk about your main deck and what to build, I don't know if I would be convinced of main decking this or not unless you have enough room or you're trying to hit that 12 hand trap mark. I feel like Bell is really underrated at the moment, but we need the format to unfold. Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. As the format, yeah, I got you. I knew what you were talking about. But yeah, as the format develops, we'll kind of figure it out. But I think after the last few nationals we've had, I think we have a pretty good picture of it. And I think the North American Nationals is definitely going to be something really close to what we've, what we've been seeing. So after that, some of the obvious stuff, Bystials, I think the majority of decks should be side decking this, if not all of them. I think the only deck that you would consider not side decking them in, obviously, would be something like Kashtira and the Live Twin variant of the Runics, because, this puts a body on your field. And while, again, that doesn't mean you're not playing, it's a lot easier if you don't have a monster in your field to play Kashtira, or it's a lot easier to play your deck if you don't have something so you can resolve one of your Live Twin effects. So aside from those two decks specifically, I feel like the majority of these decks and any other deck in the format should probably consider siding at least to Magnamut and maybe a Druid's Worm. Especially if you're playing something like Branded, you can go crazy with the Bystials because it has so much synergy with your deck. And of course, if you're playing the Dragon Link deck, you're already main decking them all. So, that's just something to consider. But I definitely think there's solid options going forward. And depending on how the format plays out and what I expect at Nationals, I think this is for sure like 80% of the time you're side decking this card, or this engine at least. They're really great. After that, Shifter. Again, this is kind of deck reliant. Obviously, if you're playing Kashtira, you're most likely going to main it. The only time you wouldn't is if you really expect a lot of Kashtira, then you'd say, no, I'm not going to main deck this card because I want to respect the mirror. But I still think that if I were playing Kashtira at the North American WCQ, I would still be very, very motivated to play Shifter in the main deck. Even though it's bad in the mirror, it still just has so much application against all the other matchups. And while I expect to see a lot of cash in the mirror match, I expect to see even more of every other deck. I would be genuinely surprised if I walked into a 12-round event and saw more than 6 Kashtira in Swiss, and then, 6 of something else. I would expect, again, 3 to 5 tops of Kashtira. But again, depending on the deck, if you can get away with siding Shifter, obviously this card's really insane right now. And then after that's Retaliating Sea. This is basically Shifter on legs. And again, very similar to Shifter. It kind of depends on what deck you're playing and if you can support it. I think there's a lot of decks that can support it a lot better than Shifter. And I think this is really great against any of the Runic dot decks right now. And obviously, it's also good against Pearly, which you might run into. That's also a deck I don't have up here. I don't expect it to be represented a lot. But again, that's just another one of those decks, like we said, that while it's not on this list, it's still something you have to factor in that you might run into. This card's just a macro on legs. Again, just like Shifter. It's really good in a lot of decks. And I definitely think it's something you guys can consider. How well can other decks play around or own through Shifter? I guess it just depends on the deck. Again, like I said, if you're playing Kashtira or if you're playing something like Branded, plays pretty decently through Shifter. It just means you're not puppet locking. If you're playing the trap variant of Labyrinth, then Shifter really doesn't hurt your deck at all. Sprite variants can play through Shifter fine. They're going to be playing more of a Sprite deck than they are the Runics or the Live Twins, but it's still really good because there's like most Sprite decks right now are like 3 engines. It's always Runics, Sprites, and something else. And so by shiftering them, you leave them in the spot where like they're only playing Sprite, which, isn't that great of a deck to play. So I definitely think it's good against that as well. But they can still play. Next card's Droll. I wouldn't main deck this right now unless you expect a lot of combo. But again, the majority of the decks I expect being Cash and Sprite. While Droll has a good application against both of them, I think it really just depends on the deck you're playing. If your deck just loses to a Rise Heart Pass, then in my eyes, main decking Droll and Lockbird doesn't make sense because when you Droll them, I still think most of the time they should be able to find a way to a Rise Heart at least. And really, in my eyes, Droll was only good against Cash because it just guaranteed you weren't going to get zone locked for 5, while also having the potential to skip their turn, where more times than not it wouldn't. This card's a lot stronger, though, because Gamma's not really around. But, here we go. Gamma's not really around, but it's definitely one of those cards where if you have the room and, of course, the right deck, it's definitely a solid option. Let's do this really quick. All right. I feel like most decks play around Droll, sadly. Yeah, that's the thing is like Droll's really good against Runic, but they get their first search in the draw phase more times than not. Most decks aren't going to be activating starter in the draw phase, at least the Sprite variants, but they're going to get a lot of their Runic searches done with, and then you're going to have to try to hit them in the main phase, and then at that point they're already making a half decent board and they have the field spell. Again, Cash being okay, I guess. Sometimes it'll skip their turn, sometimes it'll do nothing. In Branded, let's see, why are people playing Gimmick Puppet Nightmare? The Gimmick Puppet, basically you can summon it with the, I always get its name mixed up. It used to be the Incandescent Dragon. I think it's something else now. Let me see here, let me pull it up. Sanctifier Dragon, that's what it is now. So basically you use this to summon the puppet onto your opponent's field. And then the puppet basically says you can't special summon. So, yeah, you basically skip your opponent's turn from being able to special summon. They can do other stuff, but yeah, you basically use this to bring the puppet back from your grave, and you throw it at your opponent and say, have fun. Move that right there. Okay. Okay, so after Droll, because again, you can make an argument for Droll, but again, I wouldn't mess with it unless you were going to side deck it. I just can't see a world you main deck it unless you literally have room for like 20 hand traps. But then there's this little side frame engine here I got. There's Gamma and Epsilon. Gamma obviously is a very high risk, high reward card to play because you're playing one Gamma and one Driver. And really, there's only a couple decks in my eyes that I actually think could get away with playing this card. I think the majority of decks can't because most decks just need cards to play with. But I still personally think that not only Dragon Link, but the Labyrinth deck can still both be playing Gamma. We'll talk about Epsilon in a sec, but when it comes to something like Dragon Link or the Labyrinth deck, specifically the Furniture deck, you have so many cards or so many combo lines that just need cards to discard. So drawing Driver is never good, but if you know your deck has to discard cards every time it's playing, then the downside of playing Driver really isn't there, with the exception of sometimes you're going to draw it for turn and then it's kind of bad. But the risk of running Driver to run a powerful hand trap like Gamma is actually arguable in some of these other decks. Whether or not people are going to do it, I really doubt it. But I know I personally have been testing Gamma in a couple of decks, and trust me, it's definitely something you could get away with, but not a lot of people are thinking about it. Is Gamma searchable somehow? I wonder. I mean, technically, yeah, there's a bunch of ways you can search it, but I guess the question is there one way to consistently search it? Not really. The best way other decks were doing it was with Lambda, but normally you'd make Lambda, and then when the Cyframe Gamma banished itself, then you would search another Gamma. But again, you could combine that with Epsilon and kind of do it that way. But yeah, there's not too many ways you could just search this card, unfortunately. I mean, okay, let me rephrase that. There's a bunch of ways you can search it, but there's not a lot of good ways. All right, so then Epsilon. Epsilon is basically the Gamma equivalent, but for traps. And this literally is just for what everyone was asking me at the start of the stream. Eradicator. If your deck loses to something like Eradicator, if it loses to something like D-Barrier, if it even loses to something like, I don't know, Anti-Spell getting flipped in the standby phase or in the draw phase, if you ever have a deck that there is a trap card that is constantly going to be shotgunned against you in the draw phase, this is a card you could consider side decking to counter those cards. It's basically your red reboot that you guys want back that you were talking about at the start of the stream. But basically, again, just like Gamma, when your opponent uses a trap card, you can activate it, you destroy it, you summon it, and of course you get the Driver. Again, if you also happen to pair this with it, you could also run something like Lambda. Again, it just depends on the deck. You can get away with searching the Gamma at the end of your turn as well, which is pretty neat. Yeah, see, in Branded, it's a pretty interesting side deck option. But I will say this. The one unique thing about Branded is this card's really insane when you have Branded Fusion, because when you go Branded Fusion, they go D-Barrier. You can hit it with Epsilon. But there are a lot of times where it doesn't work out that way, where you'll normal summon Aliber to search Branded Fusion, and then now you have a body, and you're not going to be able to Epsilon. So that's something you have to factor in when you are thinking about Epsilon. But it is still pretty dang good at countering the draw phase Anti-Spell, which, again, I don't know if I would expect Anti-Spell or not coming into the WACQ, but I definitely think it's going to be around. I just don't know how represented it's going to be over stuff like, you know, the other Floodgates in the format. Yeah, you can't have a monster on the field. It's just like Gamma. All the Cyframes are the same. They even have a spell card one as well that negates spells. But again, all of them have the same restriction where you can't have something on the field. Would you ever use Time Wizard to summon Albion? Wait, what are we talking about here? Okay, so again, Epsilon. Really quickly, last kind of thoughts on this. Definitely something to consider if you, if your deck can support it. If your deck, again, loses to these cards that get shotgunned in the draw phase, definitely something to consider. Or, again, if you're expecting a lot of Labyrinth and you are afraid of the Shotgun Eradicator, like in like a Sprite or a Runic variant deck, it's definitely an option. And heck, it is technically a level 2 that gets on the field that, you could summon Sprites with. Again, I don't know how I feel about it because, again, most players will wait till you have bodies on the field. But as you saw in the finals of the German Nationals, the Eradicator basically got shotgunned right away, and there was no play around on it. But again, Epsilon, that would have helped him in that scenario. Use the Time Wizard to try and nuke, and if it goes downhill, use the summon. Oh, you're funny. If you could pull it off, send me a replay. I would love it. Maybe a side deck going second. But I don't know. Yeah, exactly. This would never be a main deck card. This would only be a side deck option. But I just wanted to mention it because, again, we're just talking about cards to consider when going into the format. And this kind of landed in the hand trap kind of department. But we'll talk about main and side deck. Okay, so now moving on to some of like the board breakers or going second generic cards. Evenly matched is going to be very popular. I expect that the North American the North American Nationals, I expect a lot of evenly matches, not only in the side decks, but in the main deck as well. This card's really great against a lot of decks, but against the Furniture Labyrinth deck specifically, I actually find it to be kind of average. It is very good at getting your opponent to forcefully activate all their cards preemptively. But again, it's not the best against that matchup because, again, a lot of their resources come back from the grave to their hand. So, use it at your own discretion, but it's just a really insane board breaker. So I definitely just see it generically being used in a lot of side decks and even in some main decks. Lightning Storm, I don't know if people are going to be main decking this unless they're specifically on something like a Go Second deck. Maybe Sky Striker, maybe even Sword Soul might be playing it, but I would not be surprised to see this in a lot of side decks, just like Harpy's Feather Duster. But I will also say Harpy's Feather Duster is a card that I would actually consider main decking, depending on the deck you're playing, because there's just so many decks that are playing at least a couple of back row cards that you could at least trade with, or it's actually very high impact against. In the Runic matchup specifically, if they're playing any of these Link variant decks, if they have a Link monster in the extra monster zone, the Runics can't, bring out a Hugin to protect it if the extra monster zone's taken up. So you can just Harpy Feather Duster freely. Plus, against something like Branded, they have the loss on the field. They'll have red set. They can still shotgun their cards. They can get all their effects, start fusion summoning, but I would much rather them flip all that stuff before I put cards on the field than play into a Chimera or let them get 2 Mirror Jades for free. So, again, I personally think Harpies has a lot of application. Whether or not it should be mained, again, it's just kind of at your discretion for what deck you're playing. Yeah, you'll see a lot in the main, I think. Yep, exactly. Throw them off, make them activate everything. Yep, 2 lightning. Exactly. Yep. Exactly. Okay, so then there's Cosmic. Again, this is just solid removal. I don't really need to talk about that too much, but I think of all the removal cards right now that are generic MSTs, this is just the best option right now. Super Poly, obviously we saw, the Labyrinth deck playing this in the main deck. I definitely expect a lot of branded players to be playing this as well. This is a very strong card. So many people like Sprites are leaving a bunch of darks on the field. When the Fur Hires, they leave a bunch of Earths. The Live Twins, again, a bunch of darks. The Kashtira, you saw they leave a dark on the field, so if you're playing something like Labyrinth or the branded deck, it's very easy. Your deck just puts dark monsters out to pair with it, whether you're making Mud Dragon or the Starving Venom. So I definitely expect Super Poly to be very popular. And again, it's just one of those cards that just tells your opponent you can't touch your cards. So any card that does that is definitely going to be a solid option going into this format. So I definitely would, build your deck considering Super Poly being a thing. Then there's Dark Ruler. I definitely think this is going to be a solid option. Again, just a generic card you can include in a lot of decks. I expect a lot of Runic decks to be playing it because they have a lot of removal in it. Plus, like going first, you always pitch a card with Hugin and stuff. So if you go first and you draw it, you can always pitch it, so it's never bad. This is also generically good in stuff like Branded, Kashtira. Again, Kashtira doesn't discard cards while Branded does. But anytime your deck has a lot of one-card combos, like the Sun Avalon deck or the Kashtira deck, then having high impact cards like this is okay, because if you don't need a lot of combo pieces, then, obviously just having one dead card in your hand isn't that big a deal. Let's see. Sucks because I'm on Brandon. I play. Yep, I feel you there. Still main deck Super Poly for sure. Main deck Dark Ruler or side one? Yeah, it's definitely a solid option. I would consider, like I said, main decking Dark Ruler, side decking is very solid. It kind of depends on what your deck loses to, and I kind of would make those decisions from there. Do you think we see Chaos Angel in the upcoming events? Chaos Angel is the new synchro, right? Yeah. Oh, 100%. Chaos Angel is gonna be in the next event. I mean, Labyrinth is gonna be played. They're for sure playing that card. I think the Rocket deck, the Dragon Links, will be playing that card. I definitely see some of the Assault Synchron decks playing it as well. Definitely an amazing card. I don't know what they were thinking when they printed that card. Definitely one of my favorite synchros to come out in a long time. Okay, so then after Dark Ruler, I just want to talk about Thrust. Obviously, this can search a lot of cards. There's also like talents. I guess I should have included that as well if I could spell. Oh, I have Albaz in here. Let me get this punched in. I guess I could throw that in there as well. But yeah, I think when it comes to cards like Triple Tactics talents, it's a good card. I didn't put it on here at first because more times than not, you're just going to main deck this card more than side it. But I guess I should talk about this as well. I definitely think it's a super solid option, this format. Not as much hand traps as I would have expected. Or actually, at the beginning of the format, I expected there to not be that many hand traps. But I definitely think it's something worth considering when deck building. Whether you decide to play a couple copies or side deck 3 for when you go first. Kind of depends on the deck, but the card's really insane right now, especially if you have access to Zeus. But yeah, on the topic of Triple Tactics Thrust, obviously, it's one of those things where if you have a room in the side deck to side it, then I definitely would when going second, because it can search any of the blowout cards that you're already siding. So whether you need more copies of Dark Ruler, more copies of Evenly, more copies of something like Harpy's Feather Duster, the sky's the limit, and that's what makes it so great. So if it's something that you feel like you need more copies against specific matchups, then for sure, that's something you definitely want to consider. Really quickly, let me grab this. Sorry, just adjusting something off screen real quick. All right. Let's see. Okay. And then after that, it's just a bunch of the tribute guys, Kaijus, Kurikaras, Lava Golems, Sphere modes. There's Denko, which we'll talk about in a second. Not really a tribute guy, but when it comes to these tributors, I think they're all good. I guess it depends on what deck you're playing, obviously. Like if your deck needs its normal summon, then you can't be playing Lava Golem and you can't be playing Sphere mode. If you feel like your deck only struggles with like one monster, then Kaijus is good enough. But if you feel like your deck struggles with one monster, but sometimes multiples, and you really, you struggle with a little bit of everything, then that's where Kurikara kind of falls in that middle of the road approach, to where sometimes a Rise Heart's just good enough to beat you and you need something to out it, like a Kaiju. But then when you play against something like Sprite and they have a bunch of interruptions and Kaijus aren't good enough, then Kurikara is one of those things that, again, it'll address all the problems. It'll address the singleton monsters, and of course, it addresses the multiple monsters, which is why I really think it's a good option. And again, Lava Golem Sphere mode, we already talked about it, but if you don't need a normal summon, very solid options. Last card here that I want to talk about was Denko. Obviously, we're not going to be main decking this card, but again, just a solid side deck option. One of those cards that in the Labyrinth matchup is really, really strong. Again, whether it's the Furniture matchup or the Floodgate matchup, Denko is a heck of a card, and I definitely think a lot of people are going to be playing this at the WCQ. Maybe I'll be wrong, but I expect now that German Nats went the way it did, this card's going to definitely make its way back into a lot of main decks. I wouldn't be shocked if you see it in stuff like Kashtira, but again, they're going to have to special first and then normal summon, but we'll see what decks decide to play it. I don't know if Sprites will be playing it. Maybe Dragon Link, but I doubt it. But there's a lot of options out there for the decks that can play it. So, again, if you can get away with it, I think it's one of the best cards against Labyrinth going forward. The last cards I want to talk about are just kind of like some side deck Floodgates, or like going first cards, I guess, specifically for siding. And I guess some of these you can main, again, if you're playing a deck that needs Floodgates, be it Labyrinth or Sky Striker or the Vanquish Souls or any of those other decks. Heck, maybe you're trying to bring Eldritch or something. Anti-Spell, I think, is really solid right now. It's really great against the Runics. I think it's pretty dang good against Kashtira. The only problem is it's kind of average against Labyrinth, but pretty good against Branded at most times, honestly, because it's one card that just says you're not going to activate Branded Fusion, so that's good enough in my eyes, even though they still have Cartesia. But again, normally when you're side decking this card, you'll have this plus whatever your deck's trying to do. So it should be enough to just steal games. Plus, it's just generically good at stopping extenders for, the Sun Avalon deck. This card's really good against them. And then, of course, Dragon Link's really great as well. So really, all in all, I think this is a really solid card. But I guess it depends on what deck you're playing. Because, again, if you're playing something like Runics, there's no world you're siding Anti-Spell. But, again, any of these other decks could definitely get away with it. Except for, like Branded, maybe. After that, there's Ancient Organism. Again, this is really more specifically for Kashtira, but it also really hurts Branded. So if you're playing something specifically like Sprite, I would highly consider it. You could even put it into the Sun Avalon deck because you're like a Link-based deck. It also has some applications against Vanquish Soul. While I don't like it against them, it's something to consider. But I really think it's in your side deck because you're really trying to hit Cash and you're really trying to hit Branded. And then you just happen to also have some effectiveness against stuff like Labyrinth. And of course, it also kind of works against some of the other decks out there as well. Again, I think you have to be playing highly like a low-level Link-based deck, but I think card's solid, and it's something you have to factor in when building a deck. Hate that card? Yeah, trust me, I hate that card too. I'd rather see Anti-Spell than see this card when I'm playing Branded. This card's crazy. Then there's Rivalry and Gozen. Again, it depends on what deck you're playing, obviously, to be able to side these. But I will say, in my opinion, between these two right now, I honestly think that Gozen is the better one right now. But they both have their applications, so it's something to consider. Skill Drain, again, just kind of depends on what deck you're playing. A lot of decks can play it right now, but a lot of decks can't play it as well. So it's really good against the big decks right now. Sprite, it's crazy against. It's pretty dang good against the Kashtira deck. They do get a bunch of free big bodies, so you got to make sure whatever deck you're playing, you too can put up a bunch of big bodies. But yeah, it's just something else to consider. Skill Drain's really good. Okay, before we move on to this real quick, let me just look over here. There's a couple of things I might have missed. Okay, yep. But then, yeah, there's obviously some other cards that we could be talking about. Eradicator, Magic Deflector, D-Barrier. These all three are, in my eyes, turn skip trap cards. All things that can be abused in Labyrinth, but are also generically applicable to any deck because you can obviously side 2 to 3 copies of these with like 2 to 3 copies of Trap Trick as well, depending on what deck you're playing. I think obviously Eradicator is really good and what gives Labyrinth a great edge this format. Crazy against the Runic deck, crazy against, well, Kashtira. It's crazy against the Branded deck. There's just so many times that this card resolving is just good enough to either win you the game or keep your opponent from coming back into the game, which, is good enough on its own. Magic Deflector is definitely one of those cards that you should consider if you don't have a way to tribute a 2500 Dark Monster. So if you're playing something like Kashtira, now you don't have the Diablosis on the field to tribute, so you could consider something like Magic Deflector if you don't want to side something like Anti-Spell that can get hit with, something like Evenly Matched or Harpy's Feather Duster. This has a nice lingering effect, and it stops quick plays, continuous, and field spells, so obviously against any Runic dot deck, this just will skip the majority of their cards. They're going to be stuck with their secondary engines, which the rest of your deck hopefully can handle. Also, in the Kashtira matchup, this will turn off their field spell. It'll turn off any of their quick play spells they might be teching, like Book of Moon or Forbidden Lance. Also, it happens to turn off their continuous spell, the Birth. I really like this card against a lot of decks. And it actually hits a bunch of decks, like even even in the Rocket matchup, you can hit like the Quick Launch. And again, it kind of depends on what cards you expect to be side decked against you and what tech cards you see. So I wouldn't just side this card in because, Rocket plays a quick play spell, right? But it also does generically hit their field spells if they like the Ravine or their Boot Sector Launch. So I personally think that that would be a solid option. But when you're talking about something like Vanquish Soul, while they have a lot of cards that it could technically hit, there's also a lot of cards that they don't care if it hits. So again, I'd only put it in a matchup that it's actually relevant engine-wise, not just because they happen to have tech cards that it hits. And then, of course, D-Barrier. This is going to be for, like, branded specifically, but it can also hit stuff like, I guess, any of the synchro decks, like the Rocket. I guess you can cut off half of their deck, which isn't that big a deal. But you can also hit like the synchro sprite decks. Any deck that actually decides to play Assault Synchron is going to be really sad when you flip D-Barrier and call synchro after they've activated and resolved this effect in hand, because this locks you into synchros. So if they don't have a way to get this off the field, then they just turn skip themselves, even if they're playing Link monsters, which is pretty hilarious. Spicy like it. If you turn skip runic decks. Yeah, Magic Deflector is very crazy. It's one of my favorite side deck cards. I don't always get to side deck it because, again, it's not good in every deck, but any deck that I can, I think it's just really solid against a lot of decks. But yeah, D-Barrier is D-Barrier. There's not much to really say. Again, another card that can get abused by Labyrinth, but just generically, if you auto-lose to something like, I don't know, like Branded is a horrible matchup, then for sure you want to consider side-decking D-Barrier. Or, of course, if you're playing Branded and you want to cross-out target, something to consider. And then the last card, Solemn Judgment. I'm not going to really talk about this much, but this is probably more catered towards, like, any of your Floodgate dot decks. This is just another card to protect you, but also, like, if you're playing Kashtira, I definitely think this is a solid option. It doesn't stop, like, Kaijus and stuff, obviously, but it stops a lot of the board breakers. It stops Dark Rulers. It stops evenly matches, Lightning Storms, all that good stuff. So if that's something that in your deck building you're realizing you're losing, then, or what you realize you're losing to, then for sure, definitely a solid option. So again, this is just like kind of a long-winded explanation of a lot of things that I expect to see and what I expect to run into, and definitely things to consider. And depending on the deck that you decide to bring and what you expect to see at the event, could definitely influence what you decide to main deck, and you can use that to kind of help build your side deck as well. But that's pretty much it. That's all I really have, at least for this. Really quick, let me see. I might have had something else. Yeah. Okay, sweet. But yeah, in a nutshell, I think when going into Nats this weekend, or not this weekend, in a couple weekends from now, this here is like what I would expect the majority of the field to have in some degree. There's a couple of cards like maybe Denko, maybe Judgment doesn't see play, maybe Rivalry doesn't see play. Maybe the Epsilon and the Gamma doesn't see play. Like this bottom row here are probably the cards that I would say are least likely to run into, but they're definitely options to consider if your deck can, facilitate it. But I think everything from here up, I would expect to see a lot, and are definitely options I would consider when building your deck, whatever you might be playing. Let's see. All right, so really quick, I got to run to the bathroom. So I'm going to leave you here. We're going to turn the tunes back on, and when we come back, we're going to deck build, and I'll leave it up to you. We can either build something on Dueling Book, or I can pull out the cards myself, and we can fire up the camera, and we can build something together. But yeah, think about it, and be right back. All right. We're back. Sorry about the disappear. All right, so we're going to deck build. We can either do DB or I can whip out the cards now. I have most meta-relevant stuff in front. Awesome, thank you. Glad to be back. Glad you're still here. So is there any decks that we should build right now? I see Vanquish Soul being one of the decks people want to build. Super's Heavy Sword Soul, that's right. I did have your deck list somewhere. Definitely wanted to run some games with that. Pile. Yeah, 60 card pile. If anybody could build the best pile deck, I definitely think it's you, Ricardo. Oh. Tell you what, let's hop over to Dueling Book. Let's see. Let's create a new deck. We're just gonna call this deck for right now. Bestial Synchro, that's definitely a fun deck. I feel like if I were to play Bestial Synchro though, I'd probably lean towards like Assault Synchron stuff, and then that'd be fun to build and definitely fun to test out. I haven't dabbled too much in the Dragon Link with Assault Synchron. Got a spicy tech for Vanquish Soul. Right now I don't think right now I don't have a spicy tech for Vanquish Soul. I would say for me it would just be more about making good main deck decisions in what your tech cards decide to, or what you decide your tech cards are going to be. I guess we could just build a little bit of everything, really. Let's see. What was the first one that was on the list here? So Vanquish Soul was first. That'll actually be... Let's do Vanquish Soul first, and then we can go down the line here. Just because... Let's rename this. I actually don't think I have a Vanquish Soul on this account, so probably be good to build one, right? Then we can all help each other build it. And we can talk about tech options and obviously like the staple stuff that we have to play. Okay, so as far as Vanquish Soul stuff, we got a spicy tech. What's our spicy tech? What you got? For sure, 3 of these. Gotta play 3 of these, 3 of these. 1, 1. I think at least one of this. You could argue a second. We'll put one down here. I think you should play 2 of these. At least one of those. Maybe 2. But at least 1. And then obviously 3 of the Link. So this for sure is like staple in my eyes. Let's see here. Personally, I like having the cash tier stuff in there. Whether or not you play like all of them, I don't think you need to, but you could play these 3, and you could even play the Arise Heart if we have the room. You know, it's something to consider because it's a fire. Obviously, you're going to be playing Ash. Let's see. I tried to make Tearlament, Predaplant, Branded, Bestial, Distribution deck. Super fun, new bricks. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things you can do with Branded, and I think that's what makes it so fun is that you can play it just straight up Branded with Albaz support. You could throw a Tearlament engine in there. You can go heavy on the Bystials. You could definitely do a bunch of different things. And then, like you said, there's the Predaplant engine, whether you're just playing a small package or going like really deep with all the Predaplant cards, like the Scorpios and all that. Then you could also go, what else? You can do the, is it Dragon Keeper? There's that build that plays more into hand traps. But I guess you could argue there's a lot less hand traps in the format right now, so that's also another option with that deck. 60 card Bystial Synchro with Assault Synchron and the new Blackwing monster. Oh, yeah. I can honestly say I have never done that, but I would definitely be down to mess around with that. Nemesis Flag? Oh, the Nemesis stuff, huh? Let's see what you play the fire one, right? Isn't that the main searcher? Let's see here. Add a Nemesis monster from deck to hand. Yeah. You target one of your banished special summon this hand. Shuffle target. So I like it. It's a fire too, but I guess the question is how consistently are we banishing cards though? That's the thing. Like I think it's definitely one, because what's the Floodgate? We play the Floodgate one, right? This one? Let me see. What did you say? Yeah. So you definitely would play this one. Maybe that would be something I would consider like side decking for going first. But again, this does take up your normal summon, which I don't like about the deck, because you're not consistently banishing stuff. Or am I missing something? Side deck, of course. Okay, yeah. All right. So you're thinking what I was thinking. Side deck it for going first. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, Shifter is definitely very solid. You could definitely get away with that in this deck. The only problem I have with Shifter in this deck is that, you know, once you, like, link your guys off, then, you know, you can't get them back. But I guess technically you could, like, you know, summon a dude, get its effect, get your search, then link it off, use the effect to add it back to hand. Then your grave's back empty, and then you can Shifter, and then you can start using, you know, your spells or whatever other cards. So that's definitely an option. We could throw it in there. And it is a dark. What else? What else do you guys like playing? I think for consistency, you have to play pots, right? You need that Rhoda. What else we got? You could play Small World as well. Oh yeah, Tikaboo. Yeah, unfortunately, I feel like that's definitely the way with this deck. Kurikara is definitely solid, but if I have to be completely honest, I almost feel like I'd rather play the Fire Kaiju over the Kurikara. Maybe that's crazy, but I just feel like, I don't know. I think they're both solid, but my gut leans more towards the Kaiju than it does the Kurikara. Durandal? That's the rank 5, right? Yeah. Oh, no, you're talking about the Rhoda. You already have to have a monster on the field, though, right? So you'd basically, like, summon a dude, link it off, or equip this to search the fire, then you can use the link to special it from hand, right? That's kind of what you're trying to do with it. One of each Bystial. Huh. You definitely could play Bystials. I think if you're playing Shifter, then it might not be worth it, but for sure side decking it, I think siding Bystial package is very solid. Again, they are darks. I don't know if I'd main it because, again, with Kashtira being one of the most popular decks, then it just makes it to where I almost feel like I wouldn't want to main deck the Bystials. The only time I like main decking the Bystials right now is like if it really contributes to your engine, like Dragon Link or, you know, Despia. You can equip Durandal to your opponent's monsters. That's very true. You definitely can do that. So that's definitely an option when you're going second. That's very true. Ah, yes. Stake Your Soul, of course. The non-Vanquish Soul staple. This card would be crazy if it was like a Vanquish Soul Speller Trap, right? Because then you could actually search it. We still have 6 non-engine spots. I don't know. I feel like I kind of like the Kaiju. I think it could be Kaijus or Kurikaras, honestly. I'll put Kurikara down here too. You could also be playing something like Imperm that gives you like 9 hand traps that are pretty decent. Ghost Spell's a solid option because it's an Earth. I think for sure if you don't main deck the bells, then yeah, 100% you're at least going to be siding a couple. I'll just throw them down here. Just a solid option. Let's see. I do kind of like the idea of the Durandal. And you could just close it out with like Imperms. I feel like this last slot should probably be like one of 2 things. It should either be like a Dark Ruler or like an evenly matched. I mean, if you wanted to fit this in here, this is technically a Warrior. You can add off of Rhoda also. Let me think. Pinpoint landing? That sounds familiar. Which one's pinpoint? Let's look it up. Pinpoint guard, I remember. Pinpoint dash. Pinpoint landing. If exactly one monster is special summoned from the hand, you probably draw 1 card. You can only use during the end phase. If you have not drawn a card, you send this card to the grave. Okay, so I think the only world I would consider playing this card is if I wasn't playing Prosperity. And even then, I don't know if I would do this. I think this is like actually a really good like budget option. But it does conflict with pots, and you could potentially draw into the pot. So I don't know if I love that. Moonlit Chill? Moonlit Chill's pretty good. It's a wind though, correct? So there's not really the attribute synergy, right? Or am I mistaken? Oh yeah, wind. I don't know. I think if I would play Imperm before playing Moonlit Chill, for sure. Small World? Yeah, Small World does fit a lot better with the Dogorans. The only question is do you value Small World over, like, the Durandal? I don't know. I like Small World because, again, it gets you access to some of the more unique stuff in your deck, like the Kaijus as well, to where, like, now you have, like, Rhodas for the Kaijus, which is, like, really nice. It also helps you get into, like, Fenrir in a lot of situations. So Small World's definitely something I'd consider when pairing it up with the Kaiju specifically. So definitely a solid option. Imperms, yeah, that's what I was thinking before too. If you just need something generic, Imperm was like kind of like my default option. But I almost feel like if you're not adding a consistency card, then I would kind of lean more towards another blowout card. Because like in theory, okay, like in theory, it almost would be more consistent. Like, obviously playing Small World is a lot more consistent. The only problem with this card is a -1. And this deck is very fair. You know what I mean? The deck's good, but it's very fair. So, very similar to something like Sky Striker, all your cards are important. So, while going -1 feels okay because you're going to go +1 by getting your soul and then, +1 again with it. Like you recur those minuses that you get, but at the cost of it not working. Like if your opponent has multiple hand traps or has answers to your summons, then now you're trying to figure out, okay, is the risk worth the reward of the consistency, or is my deck already consistent enough to not have to play this card? You know what I'm saying? Another option is Small World with Parallel Exceed and the extra deck smash. That's true, yeah. That's the beautiful thing about Small World, is that it's literally searches any monster in the game, so you can really tech your deck out in a bunch of different ways. Are you saying Small World over Prosperity? But put in Imperm. I definitely think like Imperm's like the go-to generic spot for here. But I guess the question is do you think Imperm and Ash and Shifter, like, okay, we're not going to talk about Shifter because obviously that card by itself can carry. But do you think just having 6 hand traps in the main deck, Imperm and Ash, is a good going second strategy or a good going second approach to your deck in the meta right now? Because if you're playing 6 in a 40 card deck, you're seeing like one. I want to say, I mean, I can do the math right now, honestly, to tell you what the odds of opening all this is. 1 sec. Pull out the handy dandy calculator here. Bum bum bum. All right, so like here's my issue. So like let's say we did three imperms. We're not going to talk about Shifter because this by itself can just skip an opponent's turn, right? But Imperm and Ash being 6 hand traps in your main deck, you have a 57.7 change whatever percentage, basically just over 57% chance of opening one of those hand traps, which is nice because that means more than half the games you're going to open a hand trap going first and you're opening 5. But the problem, or I guess the question you have to ask then is one hand trap good enough in this format? And personally, I feel like it's not. And so you get into the territory of when you're playing these hand traps, are you playing them because you're trying to stop your opponent, or are you playing them because they address a critical part of what your opponent's trying to do that your deck specifically struggles with? And right now, I feel like Ash meets that requirement because, again, generically applicable to everything, but also could potentially skip like Branded and, having really high impact against Labyrinth. But Imperm, like I stated earlier when we were talking about all the cards for the NAWCQ, while it's generically good against everything, I feel like that would be like the last cards I put in my deck if I had the room. And I feel like playing a high impact card might be a better option unless you can make room elsewhere. Like if we are playing Small World, you could argue playing 1 Kaiju because now it's searchable, right? But again, that's 1 slot. Unless you're going to cut something like the Continue, which I kind of like too. I don't know. You start kind of messing with the philosophy of the deck, not so much what you think you should be playing, I guess. Let's see. The whole point of Prosp is to get to play in Small World, search as the card you need, Kaiju or Starter Extender. Yeah, no, you're definitely right, Motion Scott. Like, I love Small World. It's one of my favorite cards. Just being able to like hand pick whatever you need is so good. And when you're playing these going second cards like a Kaiju, yeah, the card's insane. And I definitely agree with you. I think if I were playing Small World, 100%, I'm teching this deck out with a couple of searchable targets that I would want to pluck out of the deck outside of course, trying to get to your main combo piece. But I do think Prosperity, in my opinion, is one of the best spell cards printed in like the last 10 years. This card is insane. Like top 10 for sure. And the fact that, yes, Small World searches any monster in the game, This makes it to where you're more likely to see all your unfair cards going second and all your unfair cards going first, like, you know, the Floodgate that we're main decking in this as well. So I would love to play Small World, but I don't see myself cutting Prosperity for Small World just because Prosperity can also make it to where I see that Small World. So since Droll and Luck is not around, I definitely don't think I would cut it for Small World. Should definitely be Small World or Mourner and Veiler or Dark Ruler. Yeah, so like that's what I'm saying is like if you're playing more hand traps, I agree. But if you're playing Shifter, I don't know if I'd play Veiler, so you'd have to go Mourner, right? But I guess like I think I like the idea of Dark Ruler as well. The question becomes is like how consistently can we break these boards? And I guess like again if we have the Kaiju, that's kind of nice. Obviously we have our column-based effects to help remove. So that's also there as well. And the fact that we have Fenrir in the main, I think is really, really good. So I personally like the idea of Dark Ruler. While it's not the best in some matchups, I think it's generically good against like the upper echelon of what I expect to see at most events. Just cards to draw off Borger. Can't Imperm for that reason. Yeah, exactly. So that's another reason that Imperm's not that great. Because if you're drawing cards off of Borger and you draw into Imperm, it's nice, but you're not using it. It's kind of like the Live Twin deck, right? Where you're trying to play hand traps that you can draw into to actually interact with your opponent. Small World is low cost. Yeah, it's only one card, right? That's true. Planet is another solid option. Gets you Fenrir, gets you a fire. Planet's always really good. Ugh. One more Valius and two more Ghost Bell for the Labyrinth matchup. Yeah, that's definitely an option. Again, I really like Bell, and I think I 100% sided in this deck. But whether or not you main it, that's kind of debatable. I guess you could technically argue main decking one as like another Small World target if you were doing that. If you're like hoping your opponent doesn't shotgun these Labyrinth cards, it's technically something you can like catch them off guard with. Definitely an option. Maybe one planet or no. Yeah, that's what Brian was saying earlier. Just to add the planet, adds another copy of Fenrir or, you know, Rise Heart into the mix, getting you your attributes. Just good going second. Definitely a solid option. Called by the Grave? Maybe with Called by the Grave, I'd consider siding it going first, but there's not a lot of like hand traps that I'm like desperately trying to stop. Like obviously like Ash or, you know, like occasionally like a Veiler or something of that nature could definitely like hurt, but more times than not, you're not really caring about those kind of like effect negation cards because you can just like bounce your guys back to hand to dodge it. So really it's just like Ash, but I don't know. I don't think your deck's not like Branded or like, you know, Labyrinth where like those hand traps like can potentially skip your turn. So there's not really a lot of turn skip cards, at least in the hand trap form, to make me want to like main deck Call by. Evenly Matched, again, another solid card. And that's kind of what it comes down to. And I think this is like kind of where I think what you see up here in front of you, very standard. Whether this is like a Kurikara or something, that's kind of like up to you. But then you're kind of left with like whether you're playing Kurikara or you're playing like the Small World package. I think Mourner would be a decent consideration, even though it doesn't fit the attributes. It is a hand trap that you can draw into off of Borger. That was a really good point that was brought up. Even though it does work under Shifter as well. Imperm is arguably generically better, but again, just for the fact that it's something you can draw into with Borger, it's definitely something that's worth considering when you're trying to play the deck. So maybe 2 triple tactics, thrust, and 1 planet. I don't know if I'd main deck thrust. Maybe you could side deck thrust, but I'd play talents before I'd play thrust. But even then, I don't even know if I would want to play thrust, because your deck doesn't like, okay, like if my deck struggled with a Rise Heart, I would definitely consider it, just because you can like going second steal it and make a Zeus with it. But I don't know. The nice thing about this deck is there's not like a bunch of cards that just let them auto lose, which is why I think it's a solid deck. But again, your deck's very fair, so that's kind of the trade-off with it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like, I think this is like the core of what I would start with, and then it's kind of like, if I were walking to the event, what decisions would I expect? So like my gut would say, as let's say I was deciding to bring this tomorrow to the WCQ, or, you know, hypothetically if it was tomorrow, my gut would say, okay, I'm going to run into cash, obviously, and I'm going to run into a lot of sprites. So the question becomes, do I want evenly matched for something like that? Or do I want Dark Ruler for something like that? Or do I feel like I need the hand traps for something like that? And I personally feel like just throwing Dark Ruler in is almost the generically better way to go. But I think you would also have to address, is this deck how it is right here in front of you with this 46, or I'm sorry, this 36 cards you have? Is it consistent enough? Do we need Pankratops? Or Pankratops? Do we need Small World? Yeah, Pankratops is a very solid option. It's an Earth as well. We could throw it in here. I don't know if I would main deck Pankratops, but especially if you're playing Small World, it's definitely solid. But, you know, I'm not trying to draw that going first, but it's definitely a solid option. Fenrir is just nice because going first or second, the card's always, like, doing something. But Pank is, like, very... Pank's one of my favorite cards. I love Pank. Pank's just... I'm trying to put that in everything, honestly. You could side deck the Dark Ruler and change them out for Tikapoo. Yeah, exactly. But I will say this. The one thing that's actually kind of crazy about There Can Be Only One is this is one of those floodgates that in a lot of scenarios acts like a board wipe, even going second. So as long as you're able to pick off anything that answers this card, like, I don't know, like an Omni Negate, like a Baron or something, even if you don't break the board, as long as you can deal with the card that answers There Can Be Only One flipped, this card will wipe your opponent's board and reset the game, and now the turn's coming back to you. So that right there, in my eyes, is like good enough. And like even hypothetically pairing this with Dark Ruler is another thing that's like crazy as well, because you can try to break the board, pick off the 1 or 2 things that answer this card, and then on your opponent's turn you just flip this, and now you just won the game without even having to really break the board, which is kind of unfair. Frank's hot sauce for Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm guessing you're talking about Pank, right? Just goes good in everything. True. Which is better, the evenly, because you still get your battle phase? Yeah, so that's the question is, do you feel like you need the battle phase? And I think this deck definitely benefits from the battle phase, but I mean, you don't need it. I don't know. I really like this deck because it's like a very good mid-range deck. Retaliating Sea on the side. Oh, yeah, 100%. I love Retaliating Sea in this deck. This is, like I said, there's only a few decks that can get away with playing it. This for sure is one of those decks that plays that card. So I think, okay, this is what I'm going to do. We're going to rename this. We'll have a Small World version. And then we'll have a, I guess, a more generic, like, just a regular version, all right? So we'll have a Small World version and not a Small World version. I don't know what happened to half my side deck, but that's kind of weird. Yeah, I agree. Very true, Andrew. Okay, so this will be the small world version. So I'd probably do something like this. Probably do something like that. That's good there. That's good there. I don't think I'd play that. Skill Drain. This deck can play Skill Drain. I know it sounds weird, but the fact that, yeah, you just tag everything out as you summon it, that's actually, like, it's funny you say that because, like, for example, in Labyrinth, a deck that's just known for playing and side decking Skill Drain, this deck is the main reason why I stopped side decking Skill Drain in Labyrinth. As crazy as it sounds, but I don't know. I've also kind of crazy because I even find a lot of times in Labyrinth I'm tending to like not want to play any Floodgates in general, which is, you know, pretty funny, but that's just me being crazy. Let's see. Boom, 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 boom. I guess you could like throw in the Pank. Any other good little small world tech targets that you guys like besides the Kaiju? And I guess there's Pankratops as well. For Small World, put in Parallel Exceed. So I really like Parallel Exceed, but I don't know if the deck needs it. So, like, I think you can play, you know, Small World without it, whether or not it's correct right now. But I would probably be one of the last few cards I sided if I needed to, like, if I had an extra 2 or 3 slots in my side deck and I just needed something to generically cover, like, these other combo decks, then, yeah, sure. Why not throw it in? But yeah, for right now, I'm pretty sure. I think it's a solid option for sure. Just here for the vibes? Well, welcome, Jordan. Glad you're here. So I think this would probably be like what I would do. I think the Parallel Exceed is definitely an option. If I could spell. I definitely think it increases the ceiling of the deck. So I definitely think it's a good point. Being searchable with Small World's really nice. You're always making your Link 1, so it's literally just a free Heat Soul or a rank 4. It definitely does a lot for the deck. But the only problem I have with it is in the mid to late game, this card kind of... It could be good, but there's also its conflictions, right? Like, we're playing There Can Be Only One. So it's like, how often will it conflict? You know, in theory, it shouldn't be a lot because you have 6 copies of it. And like we talked about earlier, 6 copies of a card is a 57% chance of opening it. So like more than half the games, you should technically open Parallel Exceed. But again, you'll be going -1 if it's the Small World, and you know you would also have to have the Raisin or the Ryzen, however you want to call it. I'm also here for the vibes. Awesome. That's what I try to do. Yeah, if anybody else's audio is messed up, let me know. It might be something on my end. So what do you guys like doing for the extra deck? I think that's one thing I really like about this deck specifically also is that there's just a lot of room for flexibility in the extra deck. Like, obviously, you just play, like, generic rank 4s, right? Like, we're going to be playing Baguska. And again, that's with or without Parallel Exceed. That just kind of, like, opens up the door for that as well. I know a lot of people like playing the Zoos, but you could also just play, like, the Therion stuff. which I would argue is better. But I don't know. Let's see, because it's 2, 3. You get a 4 material Zeus, whereas like the Zeus, I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. I kind of feel like I would lead more towards the like Therion package, honestly. Like, you're not that you're playing the Therions, but I'm just talking when it comes to setting up a Zeus play, rather than going like Chalkanine into Borbo. You could also go into the Sprint combo. The Nightmares, yeah, you'll definitely play the Nightmares. For sure, the Phoenix. You could even play like a Cerberus if you're like side decking Nib or something, but solid option. I know Security Dragon's really good in this deck as well. For sure, you're playing like Zeus. Oh, I gotta delete. Again, you just have so much room. You could even be playing like Baron de Fleur, because like if you're playing like Bell, or if you're playing Mourner, you have the Ash with your Fenrirs and stuff. This isn't Fluandereeze? I know, I'm sorry. Well, I was kind of going down the line. The first person to jump in, we're just building some decks right now. We already talked about Nationals and what to expect. But yeah, first person to chime in, wanted to build some Vanquish Soul. So we have like a small world list, and then, you know, we have a list without small world as well. The Zodiacs with the Zeus. Yeah, so I think the option is either the Zodiacs, right, where you'd go like Chalkanine and to Borbo, or you can go, what is it, Spriggans or whatever it is. Not Sprig. How do you spell these cards? God, I'm losing my mind. Springans, right? There you go. Yeah, you could do like the Merrymaker lines. So that's another option. Because you do have a machine in here, right? I think it's just the one though, right? Yeah, just that. Yeah, so I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I've seen people go into this line here and go and search, what is his name? Sargus. And then you have Reglis that can equip, you know, your Borger. But it's one of those things where it's like, I'd much rather have this on the field than equipped, right? But it's just an option, while also being a good target to like climb into Zeus. Let's see. I know I skipped over some of the chat already. Let me scroll back real quick. Is it okay to run the Dark Rulers over Tikaboo? Yeah, but I just personally think I would run Tikaboo before Dark Ruler. But we could easily fit it in this list as well. Like, again, this doesn't have to be at 3, but I probably would do it. Again, if you're wanting to, you could even cut back on the Kashtira package. Small World doesn't have to be at 3 also. It is a once per turn card. So like that can arguably be at 2 as well. Math kind of actually adds up to that. But again, we are playing like the 1-of cards just to kind of facilitate that as well. But yeah, it's definitely a solid option. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, hey, Billy, how's it going? Sorry, again, I'm just kind of catching up on some of these. I was just rambling for a sec, but yeah, I haven't really been streaming in a while. I've been primarily streaming on Twitch, but since it's been a while, I just figured why not just hop on and do it on YouTube. Figured it would be a good way to get my feet wet. I know there's a lot of debate between, like, should you stream on YouTube or Twitch is better for this or that, but there's not a lot of people that do it on YouTube. There's a few, but, you know, I just figured I'd get my feet wet here. Plus, I get to interact with all you guys a lot easier. Baron's a good option. Yeah, I agree. Baron, just because, again, Ash and Punisher. Oh, yeah, technically Psychic and Punisher would work. Abyss Dweller. Abyss Dweller doesn't really counter too many things right now, in my opinion. There's a couple of niche decks that it would hit, but, you know, nothing like too crazy. So there's another option too that we could go, because we have a lot of extra deck space, right? Really quickly though, before I forget, let me think. Another option too, we have rank 7 access, so you can like easily play rank 7s before we move on. Just because we have the Arise Heart, just putting that out there. But another card you could play, if I can spell, this guy. You want to talk about -1s? This one's a broken one. We have a lot of extra deck space here. The only problem with it is we don't have outside of Mad Love, I guess. You don't have a lot of ways to like put your own dark on there. But again, this card's kind of nice. Excidon Knight? Yeah, Excidon's pretty solid. Oh, main Dark Ruler over Tikaboo if you play Parallel Exceed? Yeah, no, actually, that's super solid because, again, now also you can, like, Dark Ruler a board. Say it's, like, Runics or something. If you can, like, address the field spell in some way, or you just know they don't have the Runic cards in hand, because, you know, a lot of times you can read whether or not they have Runic cards if they, like, used all their cards, or if you know what they search. Because there are going to be games where they have cards in their hand you don't know about, but also there's a lot of times where they have, like, one in hand, and it could literally be anything. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is you can Dark Ruler, set up a Parallel Exceed line, use the link to add a guy back, and then like use the Exceed or the Parallel Exceeds to like set up a Zeus play and wipe the board. So definitely something to consider. I agree. Flare Metal? Oh, just for like time? I mean, at this point, I'd rather just play Cowboy, right? I feel like making a rank 4 might be a little bit easier than making a rank 6, but... Or, I'm sorry, a rank 7. Especially if you're playing the Parallel Exceed. So, I feel like if I were to try to like fix this up, what would I do? I'm trying to put myself in the shoes where like, okay, if I'm going to a regional tomorrow and this is the deck I'm bringing, like, what am I siding? And, you know, I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of, you're bringing this deck tomorrow to an event. What are you playing, right? And I feel like my gut personally, I don't know if I'm sold on Small World, but I think it's obviously a really amazing card. So I think for that reason, I'd probably keep it in. It's tough. Yeah, but they got to pay 500 each. Yeah, of course. Red Ice Flare is like a really good burn card for time, for sure. Upstart to the main. It conflicts with Prosperity, unfortunately, but yeah. But I definitely think, like, generically, this last slot could be anything, right? If I could spell, though. I think at a minimum, I just throw a planet in there. I think 100% you throw a Big Eye in there as well. This could literally be anything, and like I said, it could be like the Dark Rulers, it could be the Evenly matches, you could consider Super Poly because you have the room to be playing the extra fusions as well. What else would I like? Shoot. You could even just play generic links, honestly. There's so many different things you could do. But I think right here, what you see in front of you would probably be what I would start with. And then this would be the card that I'd be testing. This would be, if I like this and it stays cool, if I feel like I'm not needing this card or I'm getting punished for playing this card and going minus just to try to play, then this would probably get either replaced with something like Moonlit, wherever I had that. Probably get replaced with something like Moonlit or, you know, something generic like Dark Ruler No More, evenly matched. But this would probably be where I'd start. With this, I would actually consider playing a Bell as well, just because it's another branch target, but it's also just like another card that, again, like I said, in the Labyrinth matchup, there's going to be a lot of times where, like, if you were to start your turn with Small World, they're not going to start flipping their cards unless they're setting up like Eradicator Virus, but you could like Small World and then just search your Bell or search your Ash to stop those cards. So it's definitely an option. Master of Blades and which one's number 76? I'm really bad. 76. Oh, I recognize this one. It's like, it's unaffected by stuff, right? This card's attributes also cannot be destroyed by battle. Card effects. Oh, that's a pretty decent card. Very interesting. Huh. So this card's cool, but the only problem is this is only going to work for Earths and Fires, right? Because you have like no other level 7s. So I don't know if that's relevant enough to want to play number 76. Master Blades is cool. It's, I believe, prevents targeting, if I remember correctly. I just will look it up. Yeah, definitely a cool card, but I definitely think there's a lot of workaround, a lot of play around this card right now currently that I don't know if I would go that far. This format has a lot of cards that target, like Runics, but aside from Runics specifically, there's a lot of answers to this card. Let's see here. Okay. Well, to just kind of put the finishing touches on this, I would probably just play like generic stuff. I think these last 3 slots can literally be anything. Heck, you could even play like, I don't know, Cherries targets, Super Poly targets. Literally could be anything. Arise Heart? Yeah, you know what? Actually, I like Arise Heart. Okay. It's going to be extremely rare for us to hard make Arise Heart with our engine, right? That's really just like, in my opinion, not a thing, right? But in the Kashtira matchup specifically, when they go standby phase and they detach a material to bring out their own Fenrir, now literally any of these gets us our own Arise Heart, which is actually pretty hilarious. So I definitely think that's definitely a strong consideration, just for the fact that we play Kashtira cards. Let me think. I'm trying to think if there's like another generic rank 4 that I might like instead of these. Again, these two could literally be anything, whether it's Super Poly targets, other generic rank 4s. It could be Cherries targets. The BLS link. Yeah, that's a good point, Steven. Yeah, the BLS link is really, really good as well. Shoot, I actually would want to include that. I think that card's actually just generically good against a lot of things. And I don't feel like access code comes up. So why not? I like that more. Boom. Okay, so let's talk about side. And we can kind of tweak the main deck and stuff like that as well. Tornado Dragon? You know, it's funny. I love Tornado Dragon. That's one of my favorite Exceeds, but it's been a long time since I played it. That's definitely a good option. A lot of decks that's pretty solid against. Goddess. Yeah, that's a good point too. Goddess, just to help out any of those towers monsters. That's a good point. If we're able to get, what, like 4 monsters on the field, which this deck can do. Only problem is, do we have... So the only problem with Goddess is it's a fiend. And so that's the one thing that's awkward about the Nightmares as well, just in general, is the fact that they're like, some of these cards are types that we have to consider when we're talking about there can be only one. That just because we play this card doesn't mean we don't play the extra deck cards that are the same type as other cards. But it's just one of those things you have to like think, what cards am I regularly going to have on the field? And for sure, you're going to always like be having these two come around, especially the Borger. But, you know, just something to factor in. Closed World helps out Chaos Angel. That is very true. Yeah, especially if it's light. When they make it out of light and darks, it could get very frustrating very, very fast. Yeah, and again, you don't even need the Baron. Like, these are all flex slots, honestly. All right, so side deck. I'm just going to throw a bunch of stuff in here that I would consider. Doesn't mean this is exactly what we're doing, but this would also be kind of a good opportunity to kind of show you not only when you're building a side, you have to think more than just like, this card's good in this matchup, or this card helps me with this matchup, or I need this card to out X Floodgate or whatever. There's a lot more than just that. That's definitely like the first step is like, what do you need and why? But the second step that not everybody, but there's a good portion of people that forget is you need to check the ratios in your deck and figure out exactly how many cards do you need to take out of your deck in certain matchups and how many extra cards do you have in certain matchups that you can take out. I guess the best example I can give is, let's say you had like 3 Dark Ruler No Mores, 3 Evenly matches, and like 2 Curry Karas. You have like 8 cards that you could argue siding in, going second against Kashtira. But then when you look at your main deck, you're like, well, I only have Dimensional Shifter, and like that's it that I would want to like side out. Again, you could side out more. I'm not saying that's all you have, but hypothetically, you could argue, oh, I only have 3 cards I can side out against that matchup going second, but I put 8 cards in my side deck for it. Like, it's kind of counterproductive, not only because it, you know, now you have way too many cards in your side deck, but unless those cards were meant to cover other things that you do have the room to take out, now you're just ruining your side deck space. So you got to kind of figure out what my main deck is. Then before building your side, throw a bunch of generic cards in there that you could see yourself playing, and then kind of reverse engineer the side by going, okay, in my main deck, if I'm playing against X, going first, how many cards am I taking out for that matchup? How many cards going second am I taking out for that matchup? And you kind of just jot all that stuff down on paper, and then you kind of reverse engineer your side deck going after that, and kind of pick your ratios from there, because there's no sense in side decking 5 to 7 cards for going second if you know there's no world you can cut more than 6 cards or something going second in a specific matchup, right? It's kind of counterproductive. Appaloosa, 200% sure I said. No, I think you're good, right? I think that's right. Dimensional barrier in the side. Yeah, definitely solid. Let's see. Nibiru, Erad virus. That's very true as well. Eradicator's very solid. There's a lot of things we could do, honestly. So, I think I guess first you have to decide, okay, let's kind of think of a going first strategy, going like, okay, when I'm going first, I could see worlds where you're taking this out for like maybe a different Floodgate, or of course you can like cut down on Ash, you can cut down on Shifter in different matchups. Like again, like for sure, 100% you need 3 Kashtira side deck cards, or at least 3 going first cards against Kashtira, because you're going to be pulling these out. But that being said, as far as like cards I'd want going first in this deck, I think Eradicator is a good option. But I don't know. What do you guys think? If you had to say for this deck specifically, what would you guess is the worst matchup for the Vanquish Soul deck? I'm curious. What's your opinions? Oh no, running out of coffee. Whew, it's rough. Trap tricks? Hey, trap tricks, no lie. Trap tricks could be scary against most matchups if it goes first and opens up good enough. Live Twin Sprite, yeah. That's definitely a frustrating deck. I think a lot of Runic dot decks could be arguably frustrating for this deck to deal with. Again, this is a pretty fair deck. Branded is the worst matchup. Yeah. I could definitely see that for sure. There's a lot of things going on with Branded that this deck really struggles with. Hell, just like Mirror Jade by itself. Like, you kill it, it's killing all your monsters. They use its effect to banish. What are you going to do? Tag it out so the next monster gets banished? Like, Mirror Jade by itself is like super annoying, let alone potentially Dragoons, Chimera, you name it. Just there's a lot going into that. McCourier is really good. Yeah, I definitely think Branded would be a rough matchup for this deck for sure. Yeah. And that's kind of like to go with like the Runic decks. Like if the Runic decks are really nice because of all the interaction that it could potentially have, but the deck isn't like if you deal with the field spell right, then it's like problem solved. But yeah, I could definitely see Branded being a pretty rough matchup. The ceiling's way higher, and the interactions it puts up, yeah, it's pretty frustrating for this deck. 100%. Gotta go, bro. Thanks for swinging by, Andrew. I really appreciate it. Honestly, it's good that you were here. I'm glad you got to swing by. Hopefully catch you on the next one. McConco best deck? Maybe you have to show us the way. If you got deck lists, make sure you post them. McConco is actually a really cool deck. I actually really like McConco. One of those decks that I personally wish was even better. I think it's pretty fun, but you know. Okay, so I think my gut would say something along the lines of, if not Dimension, like D-Barrier is a solid option going first when siding with this deck, but I would lean more towards something like, which somebody mentioned earlier. I think it was who was it? Was it Lechunga? Eradicator, super solid option, or I would even consider Anti-Spell in this deck as well. You have a lot of spell cards yourself, but again, it's like just like one of those cards that you flip on your opponent's turn after you've built your board. I think Anti-Spell actually is pretty solid for a lot of reasons, not only just like shutting down Runic decks, but also stopping like potential board breakers against you. The only downside is, it doesn't really address other cards like, Kaijus, Evenly. I guess you really don't care that much against Evenly in this deck, but it is definitely something worth mentioning. Not worried with so many or so few go second cards. Yeah, so we were talking about it. So again, this was just like a generic small world list, and I was talking about how this card arguably is a go second card, as long as you can pick off the one card that will answer this when you flip it on your opponent's turn, because this essentially is a board wipe that also floods them for the rest of the turn. So essentially, if your opponent has like a couple interruptions and a Baron to floor, as long as you can bait that Baron to floor, and then you can set this, you know on your next turn when you flip this and this resolves, now they're just like stuck. Thoughts on Tri-Brigade Sprite? Oh, I really love that deck. I think it's really cool. I don't think it would be my first Sprite choice going into Nationals, but I definitely think it's a deck to be respected. I think it puts up a good enough first turn board to compete with really any of the decks right now. I think my only thing about the deck that I would question is going second. Its ability to play into boards isn't as strong as some of the other variants of Sprite right now. And that's why I would probably lean towards another variant before going to the Tri-Brigade Sprite. But that being said, if Tri-Brigade Sprite was the variant that I only owned, I think it's a solid option playing right now. I don't see a reason why you couldn't have success with it. Personally, I main 3 Bestial and a Veiler. Yeah, the Veiler is a good bridge target, and it's also just something good that you can, like... We talked about it earlier in the non-Small World. Personally, I don't think I would play Small World. My gut says I wouldn't play this. But that being said, I definitely think it's a very good card for the deck. But me personally, I'd rather main deck stuff like Ghost Mourner or, like you said, Effect Veiler, just because it gives you hand traps for Borger. Or I would play high impact cards like Dark Ruler or Evenly Matched in the main. You could argue Bell as well. I don't think I would main deck Bestials while there are good, Small World targets. But it's just, there's so many matchups that this does nothing against. I'd just rather have them in the side for when I know they're going to be amazing. Okay, so trying to think. Bestials are good, Bell's good. That's 3, 6, 9, 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12 would be the ideal. I want to play this card. This card's crazy. This card's crazy right now. And it's an Earth. And it's an Earth. Shift right click to move the side deck. You know what? I'm not going to lie. I see so many people like click on their cards and it goes straight to the side. And I had never bothered to just look it up. I appreciate that. Good looking. The problem with Small World is that you can't assure your Dogoran. Retaliating crazy. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like, personally, if I were going to a regional tomorrow, I don't think I'd play Small World. Like, I feel like the deck is consistent enough without it. Especially when you just have generically good cards like There Can Be Only Ones and Fenrir's. You have shifters to skip turns. You got pots. Like, technically, you have, what, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What is that? 7 ways to get to Horizon without, like, one card ways to get to it. And I think 7 and 40 gives you what? It's like 64, 65%. I can even do the math on that. Let's see. 64%. Yeah, 64% with the 7. That's excluding prosperities as well, of just being able to see Rising without Small World. So it's already almost 70%. So if you moved it, I think 8's probably your ideal number. Unless you're like a one-card starter deck, then, like, you know, you want to play like 12 or 13, but like that's not this deck. but I think 8's probably your ideal number, so you could like argue playing the Durandal or whatever the equip spell is for your like math's sake. But again, like the pots aren't factored into that as well. So Blaster Dragon, that is pretty spicy. That's pretty spicy. It is a fire. Schmidt also says he thinks Small World isn't worth it. Yeah, okay. I personally love Small World. I think the card's crazy. It's one of the best cards in a long time. I just don't think that this deck needs it. And I think that's what it comes down to is like, for example, like in Math Mech, your deck needs that card. Even with 3 Circular, you need this card. You need to see Circular to efficiently play. This deck doesn't need to see Raise into play. When you see it, the deck is phenomenally better. But let's talk about the games that were like, you already open it and you have Small World. Sure, you can like use it to bridge into other cards, and that's what makes it so great and so versatile. But it's like, at what cost? What happens when you open like 3 names in a Small World going first? Like, you're going to use it to search Fenrir? You're going to go -1 to search Fenrir as a interruption, or -1 to search an Ash? It sounds like really bad. Not gonna lie, if they yeah, no, I agree. Like, I think, but I guess what I'm saying is like, with 3 Ryzen, 3 Stake Your Soul, Rhoda, plus pots, I just feel like that's genuinely enough. Like, I think you could argue playing like 1 more card, like to make it the Magic 8 and 40 to get to your Ryzen, right? But maybe that's just me. Nice Tribe said the same thing about Ray. Oh, so you know firsthand, huh? You know? You don't need Ray. Come on. You don't need Ray. I don't know. Again, maybe I'm crazy, but I would probably do this. And again, another thing to factor in, again, I've played this deck a decent amount, but I would not say I am like one of the top players of, you know, Vanquish Soul in the States or something. They're like, by no means at all. This is just me, theory. So again, maybe Small World's needed. But really quickly though, technically, like I said, this is probably what I would do. I don't even know if I'd play this or not. This would probably go, and then this would just be 3 of something that's high impact, whether it's Dark Ruler or like Kurikara, and Kurikara instead of the Fire Kaiju, or you could play Evenly Matched, but I'd probably play just Dark Ruler instead. You could debate it. You could play Imperm, but like Imperm off of Borger, drawing it, it's not that great, but it's good enough. It's definitely just a solid hand trap. But my gut says this would be my list, and then like 3 high impact cards, like tempo swinger cards. Yeah, I agree. And again, like, since we're not playing Small World, you could probably cut this for Kurikara, right? Because it's a higher impact card. And that's kind of what you're looking at. Like, this deck is really fair, in all honesty. So the more unfair cards we put into it, the better this deck gets. Because the deck inherently doesn't do anything oppressive. But given the opportunity, if this deck can play multiple turns, then this deck will win. It has inevitability. The advantage it generates long term, the longer you play against this deck, the more likely you are to lose to it. So you'd want to end it as soon as possible with this deck. But again, this technically was supposed to be a small world build, so I'm going to put it back in. I don't want to like change it up last minute. So we'll just kind of keep it the same. And then the last card, like I said, was the, what was it, the planet. And the beer is an option. Yeah, definitely. So let's just kind of start with this. I'm not saying this would be the side deck that I would play, but you can kind of like start with this and you can kind of find the flaws, because I can already tell right now just by looking at this that there is a few flaws that I'd want to change with this. But let's take it like one matchup at a time. So let's say we're playing against Kashtira and we're going first against it. So right away, automatically, you know, going first, you're taking these out, right? Now, the question becomes, do you want there can be only one? And, you know, I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, again, they have outs, right? But they're literally all psychics, so you keep that in. Ash is one of those cards where I think it's generically good. It's a fire. It checks a lot of the boxes, so you could keep it in. I don't see a reason why not. Engine-wise, I probably wouldn't do anything. Going first, you could argue taking out the Dogoran because, again, we're going first. But then by doing that, you lose consistency with your small world. So then you have to ask yourself, do you keep this going second card in just for the sake of small world to help with bridges? Or do you take it out and then you also side out small world as well? Definitely think you should play Chambers, though. Yeah, honestly, like, there's like 8, what, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's like 5 cards at least in this extra deck that, you know, I see no reason why we need to play, honestly. There's so many different things you could change up with the extra deck. Alsa is actually, yeah, Alsa 100%. Probably just Baron, honestly. But yeah, no, Alsa for Fenrir's kind of nice. Hita's pretty cool too, but don't yell at me, Brian. Don't yell at me. Definitely need Baron. Yeah, Baron's pretty nice. Especially if you're going to be side decking more of the level 3s. Yeah, I definitely agree. Because both side you have Bell. Yeah, exactly. Both side you have Bell. Plus you could side other ones as well. You know, like, I don't think we're siding Ogre anytime soon, but if you really felt like you needed more hand traps, you could side like a third Bell. There's the Mourners as well. There's a lot of things you could do. Hi, I missed your videos. Oh, well, you're here now. Thank you. I appreciate you being here. Thank you, TJ Legends. Chaos Angel. Yeah. You technically can play Chaos Angel. That's definitely an option. Ultimate Slayer. Ultimate Slayer's a really cool card. I wish Ultimate Slayer saw more play, because like on paper I just think it's like a really cool card. Again, it's like a Super Poly-esque kind of card or a Dark Ruler kind of card. Has a lot of cool applications with extra deck monsters, obviously. I think the card is good, but not as impactful as a lot of other options there are right now, unfortunately. But obviously when you combined it with something like Natista, pop a card, or, you know, you can dump any of the synchros that you want, or like the fusions that pop card. There's so many extra deck monsters you could dump that you can get benefit from Heck, you could even dump like Tri-Brigade Link monsters to draw cards. There's all kinds of stuff you could do with it. I really like the card, but not sure if I would side it. But anyway, so I guess what I was saying is like, hypothetically, if this was a list you were deciding to bring, if I'm going first against cash, like I have for sure 3, maybe 4 cards that I'm taking out, right? And with this list right here, 100% you have to take out 3, and I don't even have 3 cards to put in. I have like 2 Cosmics, right? Like none of these other cards I want in there. You could probably like do this, but I wouldn't, right? So already the first flaw you have is you need a going first card. Which for me, again, like I was saying, could be something like Eradicator, like a few of you have already mentioned. You could use Anti-Spell. You can do more Floodgates. You can do Solemns. There's a bunch of different things you could do, really. But I definitely think if not a going first like trap card, then like a generic hand trap that's good would probably be an option to at least be able to get rid of this card. Who are the main targets for There Can Be Only One? It's good against cash because they're like all sidekicks in the main. Your side deck struggles with Branded. Oh yeah, 100%. Again, like this side deck's just a rough draft. It's just we're just throwing generically good stuff at it, and then you gotta kind of dial it back, go through all the other decks, and figure out what needs to be changed. Because I already see a bunch of flaws with it already. But There Can Be Only One also hits stuff like Dragon Link. It's pretty decent against the Labyrinth deck. It can hit Sun Avalon. It can hit Sprite in a lot of incidents. Not always, but like there's a lot of times where while it's not the best against Sprite, there are some game states where it's pretty decent. It's probably of all like the top decks right now, it's probably worst against Sprite and of course the Mirror Match. It's kind of average against Branded as well. But other than that, it hits, I would say, like at least 60% of the bigger decks right now. It does hit Dinos as well. That's another matchup. There's some other rogue matchups you might run into, like Sword Soul's a deck that it could hit. What else is there out there? There's a bunch of stuff that it's just like generically good against. Wouldn't D-Barrier be better? It's definitely a strong consideration. My only issue with Barrier is like I don't like Barrier against cash. And like I said, 100%, we're taking 3 cards out for cash every time. And aside from Cosmic, like there's nothing else. Like we need more, right? And Barrier, in my eyes, unless we make room for other stuff, I don't know if I like Barrier. It does help us with the Branded matchup, which like right now, like aside from, I guess, these, I don't know. We have a lot for Branded technically, but I don't know if I would like really want it. I don't think we need all of that, I guess is what I'm saying. DD Crow viable? Oh yeah, definitely. I just think Bestials are better versions than Crow right now. I think the reason why I would have played Crow is if I found that Pearly was like highly represented, then you could argue Crow being better in that instance. But for right now, I think just Bestials are the way to go. Unless you're playing like a deck that needs their field empty. So like if you're playing like Kashtira or a live twin variant where you need your field empty, then you can argue, you know, playing something like Crow. But I would even consider something like Bell, because there's a lot of decks where Bell does something similar to what Crow is trying to achieve. While it doesn't banish it, it normally interacts in a similar way in most times. So for me, it always goes, first cards I would consider is Bestials. Can my deck play it, and does it solve the problem I need to? Then the next down the list would be Bell. And then if that doesn't check the box, then I'd probably go down to Crow. That would probably be the kind of order that I'm looking at, if that makes any sense. Mathmech Marincess. Oh yeah, as other decks it's good against for Tikaboo. Yeah, like this card hits like a lot of rogue decks while also being able to hit like 50 to 60% of like the best decks. So for that reason, I think this card's worth it. The format's really diverse, so it does feel awkward, but I definitely think it's just good enough to carry most games. Okay, so I don't know. My gut says to go anti-spell because it solves the branded problem decently. Helps against cash. Helps against any runic deck. It's not as high impact as like Eradicator. You could argue Eradicator because, you know, you have a lot of bodies like, you know, like Borger, but you don't always get to Borger. So that's why I don't love the idea of Eradicator. But my gut says anti-spell is like the safest middle of the road card that addresses generically enough decks in the format, if that makes any sense. Have you faced Manatium? I have no idea what they do. Yeah, Manatium, I would consider like, what would I compare it to? I would call it like a weaker super heavy samurai is the best I could compare it to. It doesn't like do as crazy things, but it goes like Baron de Flor with Excel Synchron into multiple other level 10 synchros potentially, while also setting up like Appaloosa or IP into Appo. Its end board is very similar and reminiscent of it, and it also loses to Droll and Lockbird very similarly. Deck that revolves around popping your own cards to float into more cards. You use the Scare Claws to bring stuff back from the grave. A lot of searching, a lot of special summoning. So, yeah, Manatium is a cool deck. I asked because you can hit Rex and Furhire without Bystials. Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, the Bystials don't hit the Rex. So, yeah, so that's kind of like one of the things you have to address because the Bystials hit the Live Twins, but it doesn't really hit the Furhires, right? So you have to ask, like, how represented do you think each will be? I think they'll probably be pretty close to the same. So you really can't make that call, but that's also why I like including a card like Ghost Bell, because Ghost Bell can stop Rex, right? It can stop a lot of things to kind of give you that coverage, while also having application against like Branded and Labyrinth as well. It can also help against, I don't know, like if you need hand traps against like Dragon Link. Bell's a pretty generically good hand trap right now. You've been seeing the... Yeah, well, I know since Joshua Schmidt, you know, took it to the event and had good success with it, the deck's already been around, but like when you have somebody who's, you know, popular who decides to bring it, it definitely gets a lot of people to start playing with the deck. Like even myself, like, let me see here. Where are we? Like, when at the beginning of the stream, I was showing people like Mail Day came in. Again, I'm not saying I'm going to play this deck at Nats or anything, but it's an option. It's definitely something to consider. So I know I wanted to pick up my cards, but I grabbed these, I don't know, like a week ago, but they just came in the mail. But, you know. Man, out of coffee, man. I need to go make a coffee run. Ugh. Deck's insane. The Rex. Or the Furhires. Yeah, so I know we're talking about Vanquish Souls, but like my 50 cents is if you're playing a Sprite deck, it's between this and the Live Twins and Melfi. Personally, I wouldn't play Melfi over the other two because I just feel like the Runic cards are like really good because like the Runic engine just feels like the best non-engine engine in the game. So I really like it for that reason. Plus, you know, just the synergy with a lot of these decks is really amazing. But I for sure would play a Runic variant, whether it's the Furhire or the Live Twin variant. It's debatable. I think the Live Twin is the safer route. You do get hit with Bell. You do get hit with Bystials, Dark Ruler, stuff like that. But the trade-off is the deck's a lot more consistent compared to this. And there's a lot of cards in this deck, like specifically like these, that are okay to draw, but you don't want to draw. And when you throw these in the mix with drawing cards off of your field spell, there's going to be times where you just like lose a game because you drew cards you couldn't play with. Or like if it was another card, then maybe it would have been better, whether it's an extender or another runic card it could have been or whatever. So that's the risk you run with this deck. Whereas when you're playing the Live Twin variant, like 99% of, not 90, well, I would argue like 85% of the time, you're doing what that deck wants to do. Like 90% of the time, you're always doing what that deck wants to do. And that's what I really like it. While there's a little bit more fragile points to it, the deck just does what it needs to do a lot more consistently. But again, the trade-off of why you would play this is because when this deck does go off and does what it wants to do, I don't think there's much that beats it because of how many free cards you get off of it. So one of those trade-offs. Consistency, power, middle of the road, or, high rolling. All right, I want to kind of make sure I at least halfway finish this up. Again, we have like a rough deck list. My gut, again, I would need to, work this out a little bit more. But my gut would probably say something along the lines of doing something like this. Think. I actually might even do something like this. I think Lightning Storm is really strong this format due to yeah. Oh, no, for sure. Yeah, Lightning Storm. I think Lightning Storm has just like always been a generically good card. It's just like I kind of touched on it earlier where like these generic board wipe cards are like, sorry about that. These generic board wipe cards have just always been good. It's just like, it's always format dependent. But like I was talking about earlier when we were talking about the meta, like even main decking something like Harpy's Feather Duster is like feasible in a lot of decks right now because of like in the Kashtira matchup, you get rid of Birth, you get rid of the Field Spell, any back row they might be setting. Trades pretty well. In the Branded matchup, you force them to activate their red early. You get rid of Lost. In the Labyrinth matchup, you make them have to shotgun the traps. If they're on the trap variant, it's even better because you might hit some floods and strikes along the way. In the Runic deck, you have the potential of hitting the Field Spell, especially in like these Link variant decks, because a lot of times you have the Link monster in the extra monster zone, so they can't like chain a Runic spell to bring out a Hugin to protect it or something. So, I don't know. It's just, there's a lot of argument for like that, and for that reason, I think Lightning Storm is just as arguable. The only problem I say with Lightning Storm is most decks are throwing their monsters in defense going first. Or at least the decks that care about Lightning Storm, like, for example, Rise Heart. I don't know the last time I've seen a first turn Rise Heart in attack mode, if I'm honest. Really want to play Bestials. Yo, what deck are you running at Nats? I haven't decided yet. There's a lot of options on the table, honestly. Whether I'm leaning towards like either a Runic variant or maybe even Labyrinth or Kashtira as an option. I genuinely like sprites, so I might play something along that line. But I really haven't decided, and I think I'm just trying to play a little bit of everything until really, maybe the last week coming up into the event where I finally can go, okay, I feel like this is what people are going to be doing, and this is why I'm going to play X, because I feel like it fits into this this space well. I think you have to play Bestials over Crow, so it replaces the Dark. Yeah, I agree with that. So really quickly, just to kind of close this up here, this would be what I would say if somebody told me, hey, you got to play a small world variant of Vanquish Soul tomorrow at a regional. This is like 95% sure like what I would play. The only questionable thing, again, like if I had to play small world, the question would be, do I want to fit, like, do I want to cut this and like, I don't know, something else to like fit a high impact card in the main, like Dark Ruler or Evenly? And then when I look at the side, I feel like I could use another card. I don't know. I feel like this looks pretty solid. The extra deck would probably be the only other thing. Brian brought up a good point earlier with some of the Charmers being good ways to climb into things. I definitely think, there's like at least 3 or 4 cards in here that you don't absolutely need. And that's the beautiful thing about this deck is it's just like, it's very versatile. But I think this right here, if I had to play a small world list, that's what I would play. Do I have my invite yet? Yeah, I got it. I got my invite. I mean, I've gotten it a few times, but I got it. My first invite was like the month right after Nationals. I got it. I normally get it out of the way pretty quickly, but must be nice to have an invite. Shut up, Brian. Must be nice to be in the top 32 bracket to compete for Worlds. What did you rank on points in the end, Brian? Was it like last, 32nd? No, you were like 16 or 17, weren't you? 10th? Dang, first in Cali. Well, that's just because I didn't get to play as much. You're lucky, dude. No, I'm telling you, like, that's the one good thing about California, because all the events in California, like, even if I don't get to travel, so many people show up to these regionals in California that topping those events gets you so much points. Like Brian, but like in 2017, in Zodiac format, I had like so many regional tops in California, all of them being like 600 plus men regionals. And the points I accumulated, I didn't even know it, but one day I was just like watching a market watch. Shout out to House of Champs. And they were going over the world points and standings, and I was just like, watching the video, and you see like Billy Brake, Jeff Jones, all these people in running, and then all of a sudden I see a Justin Thomas. I'm like, wait a minute, and I look over and I see the Kasi ID, and I was ranked like 8th or 9th place at the time with a few weeks out, just because even without trying in World's Point race, California points, you just get so much if you're consistently topping in California. It's crazy. You got 34th out of 32 for the invite for regionals. Oh, that's always rough, man. Yeah, I've had many a times at an event where you're always, like, for example, the last regional I just went to, I wound up getting 9th place. I mean, luckily I get my invite for it, but I wound up getting 9th, one away from getting the mat and everything like that. It always works out like that, though. They come. In time, they'll come, There was a while where I was bubbling regionals consistently. You had to work hella hard for this year. No, yeah, I agree. I think the way they have it set up now, it's like it's really intense for points, for sure. No, yeah, you killed it, man. Oh, man. What are your thoughts on Branded this format? I think it's super solid. I think Branded has the same issues it's always had. I don't think it's a matchup problem. I think it's just you got to have a solid build. You got to know that if you're playing, if you look at your hand and you know Ash Blossom skips your turn, then don't do a line that just searches Branded Fusion and then gets your turn skipped. Try to see if you have the extenders to just do a completely different line. I don't know. I think the deck has actually some really good matchups right now, and I think D-Barrier, aside from being occasionally side decked in the Labyrinth deck, isn't really being played, which is a good thing. So at the end of the day, just Ash, cross out, maybe some call by. I think Branded's a solid pick. I wouldn't, if I had to guess, if I had to make like bet money on what wins the national championship, I wouldn't bet money on Branded, but it definitely has a shot. Oh no, that's never good, Legends. Sometimes locals be like that. Scored your first invite at LA Regionals with MathMech. Nice. Right on, man. That's awesome, Johnny. Congrats. Let's see here. You're always a format behind. You know, sometimes it's hard to keep up with the game, honestly, especially with the prices of cards and stuff, so I understand. It can be a little rough. And sometimes you pick up a deck finally, and then ban list comes around, and then now you got to find another deck, or the format changes, and your deck loses to something that's new. It's pretty rough. Check something really quick. All right. Well, we've been running for a while. I think this is probably going to wrap things up for me. It's getting a little late where I'm at. I'm sure it's late out where some of you guys are at too. I definitely want to do this more often. Again, I've been doing it more here on YouTube because it's a lot easier because I already have the established community, which is nice. That being said, I'm sure I'll probably hop back on Twitch occasionally. But for right now, just to kind of chat with everybody, you know, it's pretty easy just to hop onto YouTube. But we'll see where it goes in time. I recently started up the membership program here. In time, more memberships will come up. Right now, there's just like a basic membership. If you're wanting, you can, you know, I think it's 99 cents and it gets you like, you know, a couple of emotes and, you know, you get your badges and stuff as well. But that being said, in time, there will be more added to it. So by no means, there's no rush to do anything. But it is another way you can help support the channel. So if that's something you're looking to do, I would definitely appreciate it. Also, there is my sponsor, Next Level Anime. Any of my other videos should have the link. I don't think I have the link right now. I could probably post it in chat, but they make a lot of the gear that I wear, the mats and stuff like that. They're not really a Yu-Gi-Oh company. They're more of like a merch company. They make a lot of hats and shirts and hoodies. They make a lot of custom gear as well. The owner's really nice. So if you're looking to like have something specifically made, you could always reach out to them and they can usually work something out, but they're super affordable, 10 to 15 bucks for a shirt or a hoodie. Plus, I have a code, Cards&CoffeeTCG. It'll save you 10%. And again, a portion of that does come back to me. So all that definitely helps if you guys get the chance. But I really appreciate you guys for coming out. Let me see these last little things from the chat here before heading out. Picking up any quarter century rares. There are definitely some quarter century rares I'd like to get my hands on, but I'm not in any rush to get them. Honestly, they look cool. Had a buddy who went really big into tournaments once it got hit. Yeah, that's kind of like what happens for sure. Again, that's just kind of what happens in the with the game, unfortunately. But all right, everybody, I really appreciate all of you for tuning in. It really means the world. Had a lot of fun tonight. It was cool talking about the Vanquish Soul. I didn't get to the, what was the other deck? Oh, the Sword Soul Super Heavy Samurai. I'm sorry, Safrath. You're the guy who's been hounding me. Next stream, I'm going to have that thing built for you. I'll let know it. If you show up, I'll let you help me build it as well. I know you've been hitting me up about that. So I got to make sure I give you some time as well. I'm really sorry about that. But aside from that, I really appreciate everybody who showed up. Thank you again. And I hope to see you guys on the next one. Peace.